What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve,
Hello.
and this is going to be not a complete free agency episode. This is kind of just like most of the names are off the board, although there's still some significant names yet to be signed, such as the likes of Mike Hoffman and Getty Dadanoff still are not under contract to a team. But a lot of the big name players are off the market, so we figured we'd get this episode done. Next episode, whenever that is, hopefully will be kind of like just a wrap up. You know, we can start looking towards next season when we know completely where all the teams are. Because there's still several teams that, a lot of teams still have RFAs that aren't signed. They're still working on getting cap room. It's kind of weird. We're in this weird, almost gridlock situation where everybody's trying to move cap and nobody can take anything.
Yeah, the flat cap really screwed a lot of teams, so everybody's, like you said, pretty much pushed up against the cap now because everybody was expecting it to go up to, I think they said like 88 or almost $90 million next year. They're expecting it,
Yeah.
And because of the pandemic and the league losing as much money as they did, having to stop, it's now stuck at $81.5 million for at least the next two seasons.
For this year and next year, it's staying at 81.5. So it's really, and, you can look at this one of two ways. You can either look at this and say, well, to a certain extent, GMs maybe should have planned for having a roster of this much money, and then if it does go up, because it wasn't a guarantee, right? Like, it's never a guarantee to go up. Like last year, it was supposed to go up to like 83.
Yeah,
and people panicked when it was stuck at 81.5. So to a certain extent, there's a certain line of thought where he's like, oh, well, they shouldn't plan to have $90 million because they don't know if they will, because if they plan for that and then it's like 84, then you're screwed. But then by the same token, it's like nobody planned to have $81.5 million for the next 3 years.
Yeah, even if it didn't go up as high as you were thinking, right? Even if it doesn't go up to 88 or 90 like they were thinking, if it moved to 85, it still would have put teams in a better situation because now you have $3.5 million more than you would have had originally. So I don't know if GMs necessarily plan for, like big increases like that, the projected numbers, but they always do bank on some level of increase, which you can't really blame them for because the salary cap's
the way it works.
Yeah, the salary cap's inflated every year since 2006 when it got introduced. So,
and then the other issue is if you don't plan to have 85 million, like say for example you don't plan to have 89 million, right? You plan to have 81.5, and then it goes up to 89 million, while the other GMs that have already planned for that extra cap space going to have a step ahead of you now. Like, they're going to be offering free agents more money while you're trying to like move roster spots to get open, something like that. So and then it's just super unfortunate.
In terms of, remember last summer with all those big RFAs that were on the board? Sebastian Aho, Braden Point, Mitch Marner, they all signed contracts with the intention of the cap continuing to rise. Teams weren't expecting the $9.5 million to hamstring them the way it is right now for those big names. And I think that kind of reflected in a lot of the contracts we saw get offered in free agency. We thought value was going to be way higher than it is. I guess we can talk about the big one, right? Pietrangelo. Like, we all thought he was going to get at least $9 million from wherever he went. And granted, he got 8.8, which is still almost not. It's essentially $9 million, but still we expected, 9.5. And it took him, 4 days to find a team that was actually willing to pierce the cap and go so far over the cap in order to sign him.
Yeah, and there are still, like I said, this isn't going to be a comprehensive, complete look at everything because, specifically we look at a team like the New York Rangers and New York Islanders, right? The New York Rangers are still trying to figure out what they want to do with their 2C spot. They still have Ryan Strome as an RFA. They're still trying to work that out. The Islanders had to trade away Devon Toews because we couldn't afford to sign him. Noah Dobson's going to take his spot, but there's still rumors flying around that they're going to package two of those seconds with the Johnny Boychuk contract to then make room for guys like Pulock and Barzal. There's a lot of teams that aren't done, and there's still moves yet to be made, but there is enough here on the board that I think it's worth talking about at this point because there is a lot, and there's been a lot of movement. So do you want to start with the defensemen, forwards, the goalies? Where do you kind of want to start?
Well, I just want to make a point to piggyback on what you were saying about the Rangers and the Islanders. This is the part of the season where a GM really has to do his job, right? This is like This is
where you win the GM of the Year award.
Right. These are the dog days of summer, even though they're it's October right now. But like generally, these are the things that get worked out in July and August, where you don't hear about a lot. You know, these are when people think stop paying attention. You know, free agency's over, all the big names come off the board, but the real exciting stuff or the real like nitty gritty of GM work is done around this time of year when, you know, free agency's over. Well, not over, but free agency's opened and all the names come off the board, and now you have your RFAs. So I think this is really where we're going to see a lot of teams actually decide on which direction they want to go. I mean, I guess we can start with the forwards, right? I mean, the big one is Taylor Hall, 1 year, $8 million to the Buffalo Sabres on a betting on himself contract, you know, doubling down on I think I'm going to be worth more next season, and whether or not Buffalo is going to be the one to sign him or not really is dependent on how much chemistry I think he has with Jack Eichel and where they end up in the season, because they could realistically miss the playoffs and he could be in the same situation he's been in since his career started, which is I want to compete, and I don't think any of these competitive teams have the money to sign guys like Taylor Hall. So it's interesting that he went to Buffalo.
I was gonna say, I'm honestly, a lot of people are like, I got so like out of left field that he went to the Buffalo Sabres. I really wasn't all that surprised considering they were in the position to sign him, and they're a team with a very clear need for a co-star for Jack Eichel. And let's not beat around the bush. This is the best winger he's ever gonna play with, or not ever gonna play with, but this is the best winger he's played
got
with
right
to
now.
date.
Yeah, I mean Sam Reinhart's great, but he's not Taylor Hall.
No.
And the other thing is, I think Buffalo might have been the team in the best position to maybe push for a playoff spot with the addition of Taylor Hall. That might have been able to offer him a contract, right? I mean, the only other teams I can see being able to sign him are teams like Detroit and Ottawa, or anybody that's got like a lot of room, you know, Anaheim maybe. But those teams aren't any closer than Buffalo, and Buffalo's got Jack Eichel. So why, you know, people really were surprised by it, but like I was too, to be honest, when I saw it. But after like looking at it, and we talked about it, you know, at length off the podcast, obviously, because we talk all the time. But like it does make sense because, like you said, Buffalo made some nice additions to, you know, their center core. I mean, I forgot they traded for Eric Stahl, and they have Zegmas Girgensson still, and there was another guy.
Well, so I absolutely love what Buffalo's doing here because the guy, I think you're thinking of Cody Eakin.
That's it.
Is it fair to say that they have what I would consider Jack Eichel's obviously elite of the elite. He's one of the best centers in the NHL. Eric Stahl, I think, is serviceable as a second-line center.
I still think he's a really nice second-line center, honestly.
Yeah, he's not going to blow you away.
But he'll get you your 50 points on the second line, and that's all they really need because they haven't had that.
And they have Cody Eakin, who's a fantastic third-line center.
Swiss
and then they
Army
have
knife, yeah.
Girgensson, who's a serviceable fourth-line center.
Zegmas Girgensson's one-time All-Star.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, it was supposed to be the next big thing in Buffalo. I genuinely think they have one of the best center cores in the league. Am I crazy for saying that?
I mean, it's deep. It's really deep. I mean, up the middle specifically, yeah. But I think they might run into the same issue that the Edmonton Oilers have, which is they're a helicopter. They're really strong up the middle with no wings. So it's like, It's great. But, I mean, when you have Jack Eichel, it really doesn't matter, right? Jack Eichel he's done it with no help before, and now he's got help. So they're strong up the middle. I like their D-core. I mean, they've been trying to move Rasmus Ristolainen for like 3 years now for some reason, and I don't understand. I mean, I get it. He's not the number one matchup guy you thought he was going to be. He really is just better as like a number 3, number 4 power play specialist because that's really where he shines, which is strange for a guy who's like 6'8". You know, he's a really good puck mover. But, I mean, why... You have a wealth of riches right now if you're the Buffalo Sabres, right? The only big glaring hole they have is depth at the wing, which you can sign scoring wingers. It's not hard to get those guys in free agency or through trades, you know, as they become available.
I mean, there's still a decent amount of them
right
on the market.
And teams, like you said, like we were talking about before, teams are in such a cap crunch by you know, what is traditionally would be December, the midway point of the season. So whatever that would be this year, I guess, you know, March, because we're starting in January. So I guess like February, March is probably going to be like the metaphorical December of the season. So I think teams in crunches you're probably going to see make moves for, you know, try to dump wingers as the season drags on. So, I mean, Buffalo should be in a position to move and get those players if they need to. And the big surprise for me for Buffalo was that with a flooded goalie market, they doubled down on their goaltending with, you know, Linus Ullmark.
Yeah.
Who, let's be honest, Linus Ullmark wasn't terrible for them. He was decent, and I think he's a pretty good goaltender. But when you have, you know, Jacob Markstrom, Braden Holtby, Matt Murray was available via trade. even Cam Talbot, Thomas Grice would have been a nice option. You had cheap options out there if you didn't want to go out there and sign Jacob Markstrom to a 6x6 or something crazy like he ended up getting. So I think that's like the biggest. I think that's really where Buffalo had. I would give them a B+ in free agency right now because of the Taylor Hall move. I think it works for Jack Eichel, but I just think I wouldn't give them an A because they didn't address their goaltending issue.
No, and I really do like the top ends of this Buffalo Sabres roster. I mean, obviously, if we talk, their number one center is going to be Jack Eichel. Number two is going to be Eric Stahl. Theoretically, Jack Eichel's probably going to end up playing with Sam Reinhart and Taylor Hall. That was your theoretical first line. Or if they really want to load up on the goal scorers on top line, you put Victor Olofsson up there. But I think you'd play the playmaker with Taylor Hall and Jack Eichel. And then your second line is going to be Victor Olofsson, Eric Stahl, and take your pick.
Marcus Johansson they still have, I think. So
no, he's
he got traded, right? Yeah, they traded him.
So, you have your pick at your second line winger, but you still have, that's a pretty good top five right there. Stahl, Eichel, Hall, Reinhart, and Olofsson. And
it's addressed the issue which a lot of teams find themselves in when they have a really nice top five, which usually ends up being, one center and two sets of wingers. They managed to find, a set of 1-2 centers, which is really nice. And in theory, with a strong top six, like top five like that, you could throw anybody realistically on that second line wing who's somewhat competent, and you'd probably have a pretty effective top six anyway.
And I do really like their top four as far as their defense is concerned. I mean, obviously that's contingent on Rasmus Ristolainen being a Buffalo Sabre through the season. Evidently, there was talk of him not being on the roster through next season, and again, I mean, I don't really understand why that would be the case.
I mean, I really think the reason Buffalo keeps trying to move him is that they bet on him being Rasmus Dahlin originally, and he's not Rasmus Dahlin, and for some reason the perception of him is still that he should be like that, when in reality his track record up until he hit the NHL, his track record of like being a solid two-way defender was there, but I mean, he developed into a solid offensive guy at the NHL level. They have Jeff Skinner.
Team. Yeah, so that top six is good.
That's probably as good as it's probably as good as any top six in that division right now.
That tells you just how bad Skinner was last season, though.
Well, also considering, I mean, we saw news. This is kind of random, but like this works in hand with the fact that we just saw yesterday that David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand are going to miss the start of the season with surgery, which gives Buffalo. I really think Buffalo a leg up on teams like the Bruins, who are a little older. Their top six is as good as the Bruins right now, if not better, because the Bruins are missing their top two players. And I think, Tampa's a whole other issue with Tyler Johnson, but I still think like they're the class of that division. But I don't see why Buffalo couldn't squeak out if they don't fall off like they always do and manage to struggle. I don't see why they could squeak out a bubble playoff spot right now.
I mean, if you look at the defense, you have Ristolainen and Dahlin, who are two of the best young defensemen in the league. And then they have a nice supporting cast. And really, I would say they have top two defensemen with Ristolainen and Dahlin. And then you have a host of top four guys.
I mean, Henry Jokiharju is really good. I like that pickup a lot.
Take your pick between McCabe, Jokiharju, Irwin, Colin Miller, who they just signed, Matt Irwin, Brandon Davidson. I mean, a host of just top four defensemen.
I mean, that's seven. That's really seven good. That's eight, actually. 8 good defensemen that could play. I mean, what? One of them is going to end up in the NHL and the AHL. It's probably going to be someone like Brandon Davidson, who's younger. But I mean, if you can come into the season with your top pairing being, say, Jake McCabe, Rasmus Dahlin, and then you back that up with Rasmus Ristolainen, we were just talking about him, Henry Jokiharju,
Jake
McCabe. I mean, come on, they're going to be hard pressed to be. I mean, they're not the best defensive core in the NHL by any stretch, but it's very good. I mean, it's above average, if I'd say anything. That top four is probably as good as you can find for the money they're making, too.
Yeah, and it's just, they still have money to work with. They still have $13 million in cap space.
Well, they still have to sign Sam Reinhart, but...
Right.
But and they can get that
Olsen, I don't think is also... I think he's still unsigned. Yeah, so that, you're probably going to give Sam Reinhart like 5. I mean, he's coming off a little bit of a down year, so you probably swing him for 5.
He might get a bridge deal, honestly.
Right. He might want to take a short-term deal until the cap goes back up. Olsen... Last year was his rookie season. You could probably get him for like 2 or 3 on a bridge deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what Buffalo's got to look to do here is put together a couple bridge deals, and even if they put together those bridge deals, say you're probably only going to come away spending $8 to $9 million of that $13 million in cap on the two guys, because Victor Olofsson realistically can't hamstring them into trying to sign him to like a $6 million contract when he's only got 1 year.
He's played one season, right?
And he spent most of it on the injured reserve because I think he separated his shoulder or whatever it was. Sam Reinhart has a little more negotiating power because he's had a couple of good years. I think this was his third year in the league now, and he's proven that, like, you know, up until this year he's been pretty consistent, 40, 50 points on a team that really wasn't very good. So I think, you know, he has a little more bargaining power than Victor Olofsson, but even still, you spend $8 million on the two players.
You still got $5 million to work with.
Right, and that could address that. You know, you could get, you're not going to get anybody now. There's not really anybody left, I guess. I mean, Mike Hoffman, but he's probably going to get like 6.
You might convince Dadonov to take 5-ish if you get him on a bridger, but I think he's probably looking for his big boy contract at this point.
And he's older too. I think he's 29, if not 30 at this point. Evgeny Dadonov.
Well, I honestly think you'll probably, like, we have seen a lot of players taking 2 or 3 year deals in the hopes that the cap is going to go back up.
Right.
I mean, last season we don't really see too many of these 8-year and 7-year contracts being handed out this year. I mean, if we look at in terms of overall cap hit, you know, Taylor Hall is a 1 year, Burakovsky's a 2 year, LeBanc and Toffoli are 4 years. You know, we're not seeing these 6, 7, 8 year contracts this year because I think a lot of players are like, listen, I'll take the money now, but in theory, in 4 years, the cap is going to go back up again. So I'm going to get paid.
So I have a question. Alex Pietrangelo, right? I thought you could only get 8 years on a contract if the team owned your negotiating rights. I didn't think you could sign 8 in free agency. I thought it was 7 was the longest you could go. Because I thought the big negotiating thing with St. Louis was he wanted the 8x8, and they were going to give him the 8, but they were giving the 8 years, but not the $8 million. Or he turned down an 8x8 from St. Louis.
I'm honestly not sure because like there's just so much being made about.
Well, the rules are always changing, right?
Unless I wrote that, I could have wrote. Yeah, okay, that is a 7x8 year contract. So I just wrote that down wrong.
Okay, no, yeah. I genuinely wasn't, like, I wasn't trying to be like a jerk. I wasn't sure because these rules change all the time in free agency. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like all of a sudden, like,
yeah. So it's a 7x8.8,
which is still a lot. I mean, that's still a long time. That's
especially
max term.
For a 30-year-old.
Well, that's it. Max term. Max term. I mean, he's the highest. I think he's the second highest paid defenseman or third highest paid defenseman now behind Drew Doughty, who's making 11, I think, and PK Subban still got that $9 million contract that he's dragging around. I mean, Pietrangelo now, the player he is now, I guess we can just transition into talking about Pietrangelo, right? Because it is the other big name after Taylor Hall. We'll
just bounce around. We don't have to go like defenseman forwards.
Yeah, no,
we'll just bounce around.
And Pietrangelo, the interesting thing is, I mean, here I don't understand Pietrangelo. I understand Vegas wanting to get Alex Pietrangelo, right? I mean, what team that's competing doesn't want to add a elite number 1 defenseman to their team? Arguably probably one of the best defensemen. Okay, he's the 5th highest paid, which is still pretty. I mean, I forgot Roman Jossi's.
Subban, Josi, Doughty, and Carlson.
Oh, I forgot the Carlson contract was so much.
$1 million.
I forgot they signed Carlson to that contract. Yeah, and I also forgot Roman Jossi's extension kicked in, I think, last year. I forgot about that. But I mean, so if I'm the Vegas Golden Knights, right? I don't remember who their GM is anymore. It's not
George McPhee.
Yeah, it's not George McPhee. He's somewhere else. But so if you're the Vegas Golden Knights, right? You go to the Western Conference Final this year. You've been to a Western Conference Final before, and you've played for a Stanley Cup, all without any of like star power really, except for, you know, the additions of like Mark Stone. But the roster itself was solid. Constructed pretty solidly. There really aren't a lot of holes on it, as much as I dislike them. But I don't understand why they went about feeling the need to mortgage the farm to get, you know, a piece like this when realistically they didn't need to get him, right? There wasn't an obvious need for Alex Pietrangelo in Vegas, right? It's not the Rangers who have an obvious need for a number 1 defenseman right now, who they're hoping either Adam Fox or Jacob Trouba becomes. They have Shea Theodore, who's trending towards being a number 1 defenseman, really making half the money that Alex Pietrangelo is making right now. So, I mean, they've already put themselves in a cap squeeze because everybody knew they were chasing Pietrangelo as soon as free agency started because it's been happening. yeah, I don't know how the Anaheim Ducks have one of the highest payrolls in the league, and it's one of the worst teams in the league. I mean, LA's got to be up there too. LA's payroll is ridiculous, and they're not very good. All right, I lied. They're not. I thought they were making more. Oh, I guess a lot of those contracts came off the books in the last couple of years. Some of like the Toffoli contract.
Is still under the cap floor.
I mean, Ottawa's doing it right though. Ottawa's got how many promising young players right now?
They're going to be disgusting in like 3 or 4 years. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I think in 2 years they're going to be a playoff team.
Oh yeah,
they're going to be nasty. I mean, Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, and Alexander Holtz. Or not Holtz. Alexander Holtz. Disgusting.
Holtz is a devil.
Oh, he's a devil. Who'd they get? They got the winger, didn't they? Or they drafted a defenseman. They drafted that other defenseman. Not
Jake Sanderson.
Sanderson, not the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, they have Stützle, Sanderson, and their other pick was like all the way down here.
Yeah. For some reason, I always forget about that.
LOL. Idiots.
Yeah, I still don't know what the Blue Jackets were thinking.
Why though? Ridley Greig. Yeah. So
back to Pietrangelo, right? Like
Vegas is not in a very good spot right now.
Well,
as far as the cap is concerned, as far as the roster is concerned, it's a Stanley Cup contending roster.
But they put themselves in this hole. Like, I don't feel bad for Vegas right now going out there trying to shed players and having to shed players that realistically they didn't want to move, like Nate Schmidt, who went to Vancouver, which I think is a great pickup for the Canucks. But when it's all said and done, they realistically did the same thing Toronto did with John Tavares, which is they took their competitive window and made it significantly smaller because they have guys who they're going to need to sign, or they're going to have older guys they're going to need to move in order to continue to stay under the cap. I mean, I could see guys like Marchessault getting moved. I could see, Alec Martinez's contract comes off the end of the book at the end of the year, but they still have to, at the end of next year, they're in a pretty decent spot. I mean, they have guys, but I still just don't understand why they felt the need to put themselves in this position, especially when they couldn't trade Marc-Andre Fleury. Yeah. I mean, they were offering everything to get rid of him. I think at one point they were retaining the max amount of cap you can retain, which is I think 50% of a contract, and the second round pick, and nobody took it because what I think Pierre LeBrun or somebody tweeted about on Twitter is no GM in the league is really your friend. They're not there to help you. They're there to win. And nobody's going to take something off your hands to help you out unless you really pay them. And with a flooded goalie market, like, why would you take a chance on Marc-Andre Fleury, who wasn't very good last year and is north of 35 now, when you could sign guys like Braden Holtby and Markstrom and trade for Matt Murray, Well, that's, and that's why I said at the start of this whole thing, I don't think Fleury is going to get traded before the goalies get off the market. I thought he was going to get traded after, when a team like the Buffalo Sabres, who somehow managed to whiff on every goalie on the market. I don't even think they attempted to sign anybody. Like, it's not even like they whiffed. They didn't come up to bat.
Which, again, I genuinely think it's going to be a super tight... The East is just stacked this year. It's just ridiculous with how many teams are going to be good. I mean, if we look at just in the Atlantic Division, I think the Sabres have improved this offseason. I'm not sold on Montreal. I think Tampa's still a good team. The Toronto Maple Leafs are a fantastic regular season team, playoffs notwithstanding.
I think the Maple Leafs, just in terms of improving, I think the Maple Leafs actually started to try to address the issue we had with them, which is that they're soft. I mean, they got, Zach Bogosian.
They got Zach Bogosian. They signed Wayne Simmons. I do want to get to them later because they're a whole other issue.
Yeah, but to your point, everybody's kind of improving at this point.
So we had Tampa, Toronto, Boston is still a good team. If not, they're aging, but they're still a good team. Buffalo's going to make things interesting in the Atlantic Division. Florida, if they can somehow get their act together and Bob turns into Bob, they should compete.
I mean, Ottawa's going to be better this year. They're not going to compete for a playoff spot, but they're going to. Yeah. They're not an easy win. You're not going to walk into Ottawa and walk away with 2 points every time.
So I mean, that's just 5 teams in the Atlantic Division, and then in the Metro, every team pretty much besides the New Jersey Devils, I think, will be competing this year. So that's another 5 teams?
6
or 6 teams. Wait, there's 8 teams per.
So it's 7 teams.
I mean, Islanders, Rangers, Hurricanes, Capitals, Flyers. I mean, just right there alone, stop. You have 5 good teams. The Penguins are still a good team. I mean, like, there's no wiggle room in Eastern Conference at this point. That being said, I do think the Sabres can make things interesting if their goaltending can hold up, because I think that they're nearing the point of being a solid roster. Their top 6 and top 4, in terms of top 6 forwards and top 4 defensemen, are solid, and they have a really deep center core, which is really important. It's just the goaltending that I'm questioning. So I think they definitely put themselves in a good spot. But that being said, to kind of round this back to Alex Pietrangelo, I was very surprised that they didn't. I'm not sure if they called Vegas or not, but basically the word is, as soon as all the goalies were off the market, the Vegas Golden Knights came out and said, well, we're going to start the year with Fleury and Robin Lehner. And I think Buffalo's doing themselves a disservice if they didn't at least even look into, hey, if they wanted to retain 25% of his cap and give me a pick with it, I need to go. Like, why would you not take that if you're the Buffalo Sabres?
At the very least, kick the tires, right, and just ask.
It's only a 2-year contract. Worst case scenario, if anything else, Fleury is probably an improvement on at least Carter Hutton, and he's probably as good, if not a little bit better at this point than Linus Ullmark.
Well, because you're not trading for prime time Marc-Andre Fleury, right?
No,
you're trading for 38-year-olds. Road warrior Marc-Andre Fleury, which again is an improvement over probably both their goaltenders, and he brings a winning culture. I mean, think about it. He's won two Stanley Cups. He's been on 3 Stanley Cup winning teams,
and he went to a finals in his first year with
Vegas. And he's played in Western Conference Finals with Vegas. He's played in how many Eastern Conference Finals with the Penguins? I mean, the guy's a proven winner.
Like I said, worst case scenario, it's a 2-year contract. If it doesn't work out, that's just 2 more years for that Juho-Pekka Luukkonen kid that they think they're really high on. Just gives him another 2 years to develop and come over. I think they kind of did themselves a disservice by not making a push for a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury. And then in turn, again, to wind us back to the Vegas Golden Knights, like, it kind of just really hamstrings them now, because they have, sure, I mean, you have $7 million in what is essentially at this point not dead cap, but it's cap that the league knows you didn't want. So the relationship with Fleury at this point, it's like, that's on the rocks. It's like your girlfriend catching you with a text that said, I think, like, to your boy, that's like, I think I'm gonna break up with her. It's like, really? And you're gonna try to make this work?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's like,
they were actively shopping you and giving people incentive to buy you off their hands, and you're gonna go into the season with and that's nothing with Marc-Andre Fleury, because he's been a consummate professional his whole career. But you have to think, like, something in the back of his head's like, really? Like, I'm still here?
The real thing I think is interesting about it is, like, I really don't even think that them saying they're going to keep him is a product of Marc-Andre Fleury at all. I really think it's that they had no buyers and they just realized they had to just eat it, and just wait. Because I don't think, it's not George McPhee, but I don't think their GM looked at that roster and went, wow, you know what? I really do actually want to hold on to Mark. He's a great player, great goaltender, consummate professional. I realistically think he looked at it and was just like, all right, well, we've been trying to trade him since, like, March or April now. Like, he's just actively getting shopped. Kelly McCrimmon, that's it. Actively getting shopped for, at least 4 or 5 months now. Because especially after the acquisition of Robin Lehner, who then went on to outplay Marc-Andre Fleury the entirety of the playoffs, the regular season and the playoffs. So I really just think that's them just tucking tail and running at this point, because they really don't have anything else. They have no other option other than to eat that.
I think this is really their last chance to trade Fleury before they have to end up just keeping him on the roster next season. Because let's think of it this way. Right now, there's still the thought in the NHL that Fleury is a starting goalie who has proven he can still start. He wasn't bad for them last year. He wasn't great. He wasn't, like, lighting the league on fire or anything, but he also wasn't, like, the worst goalie. Like, he wasn't like Bobrovsky in the beginning of the season levels of just terrible. Like, head-scratchingly terrible.
Yeah.
So there's still that perception in the NHL that Marc-Andre Fleury can start on most teams, right? Think about next season. Think about the season after this upcoming season, when he was, he puts up a 2.27, a 2.77, and 9.05. That's pretty serviceable, right? It's not great.
I mean, and in 4 games in the playoffs, a 2.27 and a 9.10.
So he's coming off a season like that, right? what happens next season when you're still trying to trade Marc-Andre Fleury and you spent an entire season platooning with Robin Leonard? Now he's not a starting goalie anymore. Now he's a 1B guy making $7 million. Is that really worth it to almost any team? At this point, he's still worth it to some teams. Like I said, the Buffalo Sabres or even like the Edmonton Oilers, because it's like, look, he's just starting goaltender. Next season, after he platooned for a whole season, what happens if the thing with Robin Leonard and Thomas Greiss happens where they platoon for the first half of the season, Leonard catches fire and runs with it and ends up finishing with like 54 something starts, and Fleury starts like 30 something? You're gonna trade for a guy who started 30 games making $7 million,
who is at what this point become an unknown quantity now, right? Like at this point, like you said, he's a known commodity. He's a starting goaltender in the NHL. They're running the risk of turning him into Henrik Lundqvist, honestly, which is Henrik Lundqvist lost his job not only one but two young goaltenders. So the perception in the league was, well, it's Henrik Lundqvist isn't a starter anymore. He's not the guy. So he goes out and he has to get a 1-year, $1.5 million deal from the Washington Capitals. The Rangers actively tried to get rid of Henrik Lundqvist, and teams like Colorado came calling because Colorado also needs to upgrade in goaltending. And it's through no fault of Philip Grubauer. It's just that Philip Grubauer is not an elite goaltender, and the perception of Henrik Lundqvist originally was that he could still reach those heights. But after platooning the whole year and then losing his job to Shesterkin, he became immovable with that $8.5 million. And that's exactly what they're running the risk of doing to Marc-Andre Fleury. And then what? You have to buy out that contract, and you have whatever turns out to be like $4 or $5 million of dead cap that you actually can't do anything with, where at least right now he's a commodity, he's a piece.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing for goalies is that it's incredibly difficult to move a goalie. I really honestly think anything past what would be December in a normal season, anything more than a month or two into the season, it becomes harder and harder to move a goalie. I mean, you don't really see goalies, especially starting goalies, we'll say. Backups is a carousel.
Platoon guys, they go, yeah.
But I mean, we were discussing the other day, the last time I can think of a big name goalie being moved at the deadline was when the Blues acquired Ryan Miller.
And we all know how well that went. I mean,
it just doesn't. Goalies need time to settle in, new team, new system, new goalie coach. Maybe they go from a team like heavy shot blocking team to a team that's more open, so they're seeing more shots, or maybe they go from a team where they're seeing 30 to 40 shots a night to seeing like 20, 25, and that's a big significant difference.
Well, I mean, that's what happened to Ryan Miller, right? He went from a wide open, not very good defensive Buffalo team where he was seeing 35, 40 shots a night, and he was good. He was lights out. And he gets used to that, he gets used to seeing a lot of high volume of shots. He's active in the play all the time, to St. Louis, who was one of the better defensive teams in the league at that point, to seeing, like you said, 25, maybe 30 shots. But a lot of them aren't clean, they're not good looks. He's fighting through screens, and whereas Buffalo, the shots were pretty much coming in from right on top of him. He's seeing them, So it's hard. It's not something that's usually recommended.
So honestly, the fact that Fleury's going to be starting a year in Vegas doesn't really bode well for me in terms of their sustainability. Now it's good he's only on the 1 year the 1 year after this season. It's only one more year, and look, if they go on to win the Stanley Cup, nobody's questioning it. I guess to kind of not put a bow on it, but kind of give my overall thoughts on Pietrangelo signing with Vegas. It's Alex Pietrangelo. He's one of the best defensemen in the leagues right now. Realistically speaking, you can look at that contract, say 7 years for a 30-year-old. That's going to be rough towards the end of his career, but they're not still good. Vegas is not going to be competing towards the end of his career. I think the window for Vegas right now is maybe next 3 years is like legitimate win the Stanley Cup, and then they'll probably have 2 years of what the Sharks were in 2016, where make the playoffs, see what happens. The Sharks made that miracle run to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Penguins. And then after that, you kind of start hitting the rebuild button. But I don't think it was necessary. I think it was an unnecessary, robbing Peter to pay Paul, where it's like you get rid of Nate Schmidt to sign Pietrangelo when it's like your defense was you already had the second most points from defensemen in the playoffs last year behind the Dallas Stars. And realistically speaking, one of the only reasons you lost that Western Conference final is just because you never made the adjustment to shut down the defensemen of the Dallas Stars. I think honestly they probably would have been better off with a coaching switch than a defenseman switch. But listen, you're not going to argue with signing a guy of the caliber Pietrangelo. It just was really weird to me that they went they had to make so many adjustments and so many moves
Just to
get a
accommodate it.
slight upgrade.
I'll put it to you this way: you were already driving a Cadillac. You sold your Cadillac to buy a Mercedes. What was the point? There was nothing wrong with your Cadillac. It drove you to work every day.
This isn't the Rangers signing Panarin, where there's a clear need and
it's an immediate upgrade,
massive upgrade.
Right.
This is an upgrade, but was it really worth trading away Nate Schmidt? And you're still over the cap, and you still only have 21 players on a roster. Usually teams carry 22, 23 for a couple of guys for scratches and injuries, so you're still over the cap. Granted, by a little bit, but you're still over the cap.
I mean, a little bit because they had to dump Nate Schmidt. Without dumping Nate Schmidt, they were like $8 or $9 million over the cap.
Yeah, and so you're still going to have to make moves if you're the Vegas Golden Knights, unless you want to go into the season with a 20-man roster and just really hope that if guys get injured, that you're home for it. But, I mean, this doesn't move the needle for me. They were already a Stanley Cup contending team. They were already a legitimate, if they would have won the cup, I wouldn't have been surprised type team. So why would you make all these moves to get a guy who's realistically, does this make them any more of a contender in my eyes? Not really, because they were already a good team.
I really think, if anything, it moves the needle backwards because, like we said, it shortens that window that they had. Because before they go out and sign him, their window realistically is probably 4 or 5 years, like wide open. Because especially right now with the Western Conference, a lot of those teams that we knew to be like the teams are falling off. I mean, the St. Louis Blues aren't going to be as good this year as they were last year. They lose Pietrangelo, they get Torrey Krug. It's a nice consolation prize, but it's not Alex Pietrangelo. Colorado's getting better. I mean, their division's wide open, right? The historic powerhouses in the Pacific are all gone. Anaheim, San Jose, and LA are all gone. They're all going to be wallowing at the bottom of that division for conceivably the next 3-4 years. So the division was wide open. They have a shot. I mean, obviously you have a shot to get a franchise-changing player. But when you're not in a position, when it's not in a position to actually change your franchise, why would you do it? Like you said, the Rangers needed a franchise-changing player, and Panarin hits the market. There's an obvious need, and it's a match made in heaven. Teams that need guys like Alex Pietrangelo as like franchise-changing players, like at being a franchise-changing player toward that team, would be a team like Ottawa, Detroit, the Rangers. You know, teams that need number one defensemen, but they're not in a position to sign him.
Even a team like Colorado.
I mean, yeah, to play him with Cale Makar, I mean, that's easily one of the best pairings in the league.
Yeah, it just seemed really
odd,
weird. You know, I do want to stay in the Pacific Division, though, because I really, really want to talk about the Flames, the Canucks, and the Oilers. So we'll start with the Oilers because the Canucks and Flames kind of go hand in hand. We'll start with the Oilers, and Mike Smith comes back to the Oilers. They have all these goaltending options, and we know for a fact that they whiffed on some of these guys because they were talking to a lot of them.
They were talking to almost all of them. I'm pretty sure they were talking to Markstrom, Holtby. Like, I'm pretty sure they even at some point even called and asked about, you know, Cam Talbot. And here's my thing with the Oilers, right? After the big names come off the board and Thomas Greiss is still there, he's still on the board. He goes to sign in Detroit for 2 years, 3.6. You're going to tell me that you'd rather sign Mike Smith than Thomas Greiss to platoon with Mikko Koskinen? Thomas Greiss has proven he can be a platoon guy. He can play those, 40, 41 games and get you 25 wins. He can do it. He did it with the Islanders for, 3 years, 4 years? Platooning with, Varlamov and Leonard.
He started out platooning with Halak. Or he was Halak's backup. Halak played 60 games a year.
Yeah, but then it became more of an even platoon relationship as Halak got older.
He's genuinely probably the best 1B goalie in the league.
Easily. It's like him and Khudobin are
Khudobin and McElhinney are the best 1B guys in the league.
Yeah.
Even though McElhinney's not a 1B guy
even
now.
Even Halak's a solid 1B option.
It's just... And they've made some other moves, right? So they go out and sign Tyson Barrie. I'm not in love with that for them.
Because they already can score goals. They needed to be able to defend better. They needed to keep pucks out of their net. That's the reason they lost to Chicago. Was Chicago's goaltending managed to hold up slightly better than theirs, and it's like, okay, that's great, but I mean, then you get Alan Quine. They signed Kyle Turris, which is okay.
They signed. Okay, so I think Turris is a fine signing. It gives you an option at third C that you really didn't have before, because you're not going to unseat McDavid and Draisaitl. That's no freaking way. You sign Kyle Turris to a 2-year prove-it contract. Do you still got it? Or can you at least still be a functional player in the NHL? I don't think he's ever going to reach the heights that he reached with the Ottawa Senators.
Oh, no.
You get a guy like, Tyler Ennis, a really nice depth third-line winger. You get Alan Quine, again, a third-line center winger type guy.
Alan Quine was an Islander at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I thought so.
He's a nice third-line, again, but a scoring third-line guy. They signed 3 scoring third-line guys and a puck-moving defenseman, which
combined with a goaltender who is known to be kind of leaky.
And I was going to say, all of that would be fine if you got a guy like Marsham or, Holtby, or even a guy like Corey Crawford, or not Corey Crawford, I don't know.
Thomas Greiss. Henrik Lundqvist even would have been an upgrade.
Make the trade for Matt Murray. Like, the thing that kind of bothers me about this Edmonton team is they're making moves. Did they not watch any Toronto Maple Leafs games last year?
Did they not watch the Stanley Cup final? That's really my question. Like, the last 2 Stanley Cup finals have been 2 big, hard-hitting, defending, good teams that can defend, right? I mean, Tampa Bay is one of the most solid defensive teams in the league. Dallas has been one of the most solid defensive teams in the league, like, the last 3-4 years, and everybody knows that about them. St. Louis, Boston. I mean, these are the 4 teams that competed for the last 2 Stanley Cups, and they were all big, checking teams that can score.
Even if they only watched this year's Stanley Cup Finals and they said, okay, well, we don't have the money for Jacob Markstrom, Braden Holtby, Anton Khudobin was also on the market and he played in the Stanley Cup Finals.
I think he circled back and is signed with Dallas again, right? Or he's talking to Dallas.
He's on the Dallas Stars. He signed with them.
Yeah,
again.
he did.
But it's like, if you're the Edmonton Oilers and you're just so stuck on this idea of like rebuilding the 1980 Edmonton Oilers, just like everybody's a puck mover, okay, fine. But
that team had Grant Fuhr.
You still need a serviceable 1B type guy, and you had 2 of them on the market, Anton Khudobin and Thomas Greiss. And you ended up with the same guy you had. I would have even been okay with if they would have signed Corey Crawford, because at least it's a different guy.
Give him a shot.
Take a shot in the dark. You circled back to the same guy that wasn't good enough last year and isn't going to be good enough this year.
I mean, honestly, this doesn't sound stupid. I would have been okay with them taking a shot on Corey Schneider. Just for the hell of it, right?
At least it's a different face.
And it's like, all right, well, Corey Crawford might not have had it. He had a lot of injuries with the Devils. But like when he played for them this year, he looked okay. He looked decent. I mean, Mackenzie Blackwood stole his job. Mackenzie Blackwood's been good.
Right.
But that's not like, take a shot on Corey Schneider. Worst case, he ends up backing up Mikko Koskinen. And then what'd you really do? You spent $1.5 million on a backup, which is what every other team in the league is doing. So it's like, oh no, you missed. But then you go up to bat, you strike out on literally everybody, and then in the 9th inning, you go, all right, we're gonna put in the guy who didn't do anything for us. We're gonna go out there and he's the guy we need. It's like, what? Why? And I've seen a lot of advanced analytics and all like that kind of stuff from guys like Mike Kelly, who I really like. We both really like. He does a lot of good work, but I think he relies too heavily on numbers and not the eye test as much, because he said, Corey Crawford and he said the Blackhawks had one of the best goaltending tandems in the league last year, and by the numbers, yes, they did, but that's driven entirely by the fact that they had Robin Lehner and not Corey Crawford. So. And the Oilers also had a decent, by the numbers, were one of the better goaltending teams in the league. But it's like, I still don't like the eye test, because everything I saw from Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen doesn't make me feel any better about this.
Look, you can point at the numbers and say that Crawford had a good season last year. And if you just specifically look at the numbers, sure, he did. Also, weirdly, the Edmonton Oilers were one of the better penalty-killing teams. They had like a top 5 penalty kill last year.
Yeah,
great.
Somehow.
But when you watch that opening round, between Crawford and Koskinen / Smith was a train wreck. It's not, you can't look at a game and say, oh, the Oilers won 4-3, great game, right? When those 3 goals that the Blackhawks were scoring were absolute trash that Smith should have stopped, because that's not sustainable.
I mean, and Smith has this reputation as being one of the best puck-moving goaltenders in the league.
Where did he get this reputation from?
Because I think it's because he plays the puck so much. He loves to play the puck that like you see him make these great passes with it, but like that's the only highlight you see. You don't see him serving up those pizzas that he served up in the playoffs. I mean, he put it right on the guy's stick and they scored
twice.
Like he literally looked the guy in the eye and put it on his stick. It's like
he opened an Italian eatery in the friggin' Rexall place. Like he was just tossing lasagnas left, right, and center.
right up the middle of the ice. He was just serving them up deep dish, bro. Like I don't know. So I don't know where that reputation came from, but it's just like it's not sustainable, like you said.
So
like,
where does this put the Oilers for you? Are they competing for a spot in the Pacific Division this year? Actually, let's not even do that because there's still a lot to be decided. But as the roster stands right now, did they get better? Did they take a step back?
I mean, I guess they got slightly better just because Tyson Barrie is a nice piece. I mean, he's a player any team in the league really would want, but just because of the money and the cap, it's not there. I think he only signed 1 year, right? Another prove it contract.
Yeah, 1 year, 3.75.
Which is, I mean, that's a nice contract. That's a decent contract for a guy like that. A good number 3, number 4 power play specialist. But like, you already have Oscar Klefbom. You already have Darnell Nurse. These are guys that already fit in this mold. I mean, Darnell Nurse has a little more snarl to his game because I think he's bigger than Klefbom, and he's rounded out his game a little more than Klefbom has.
You have Ethan Bear.
Ethan Bear was good. I think he's an RFA still. Or am I thinking? Yeah, I think he's an RFA. But he was good. I mean, you can look to make him, maybe he takes another step next year. I mean, I don't know.
I think they became a better regular season team.
Yeah.
But does that make me feel any... I think they became a better regular season team, and they're going to be an absolute abomination to watch in the playoffs.
If they even make it, honestly. like I said, the Central Division is still really strong. So I could still see 5 teams coming out of the Central. So that'd be your top 3 in both wild cards, right? Which is what ended up happening this year. Or almost.
It would have.
It would have without the format change. I don't know. I don't think it puts them in a better position to compete against teams like Vancouver, who's noticeably gotten better, and Calgary, who's also noticeably gotten better, and Vegas, who was already good and added Alex Pietrangelo.
Well, let's talk about Vegas or St. Louis. Vancouver and Calgary, because their kind of fates were kind of intertwined this offseason because both Jacob Markstrom and Chris Tanev go from the Vancouver Canucks to the Calgary Flames via free agency. Weirdly, also, they didn't sign Troy Stetcher. They let him walk in free agency. I thought that was a really weird one. And I've been going back and forth. I've really been going back and forth debating in my own head whether or not the Canucks got any better or they got worse this offseason. And it's really been a big question mark in my mind as far as where do I sit with this team. And my gut reaction, my initial reaction when I saw they let Chris Tanev, Jacob Markstrom, and Troy Stetcher walk was yikes. I was not, and Tyler Toffoli actually, now that I think about it.
So here's what I've been reading about this, right? And apparently a lot of Canucks fans and like media people like this because it's a very pragmatic approach from Jim Benning, right? It's very like these guys probably wanted more than he was willing to sign them for, and he just walked away from it. Which is, I'd rather GM put his hands up and go, listen, I'm not going to sign you to an absorbent contract just because I want to hold on to you. Like, the value's not there, I'm not going to do it. And I can respect Jim Benning for saying that, being like, listen, Markstrom, like, I can't give you 6 years. I just can't. Because we have Thatcher Demko, who proved he can play. He looked good in the playoffs for them. He looked really good. And you go out and sign Braden Holtby, and you only give him 2 years. He's essentially expansion draft bait at this point. You can expose Braden Holtby to the expansion draft now. You can hold on to Thatcher Demko. It wouldn't make sense to lock in a Jacob Markstrom for 6 years only to expose him to the expansion draft. Especially if he would have wanted probably a no-move clause or something into that contract. I'm not sure if he ended up with one or not. But it's just those kinds of, you can't factor in those kinds of things. So Jim Benning being like, all right, listen, I can't do that for the good of the team. I'm gonna walk away.
Yeah, and
that being said, though, Tyler Toffoli goes to Montreal, gets 4 years, $4 million, which is exactly what he was talking about with the Canucks. So I don't know whether
you have signed him there.
Yeah, I don't know where the disconnect was, why he walked away from that one specifically. But
when I look at the moves that the Canucks made this offseason, by letting Chris Tanev walk, he ends up going to Calgary on a 4-year, $4.5 million deal. You let Jacob Markstrom walk, he goes to Calgary 6x6. You let Tyler Toffoli walk, he goes to Montreal 4x4.25.
Right.
So you subtract those guys. And did you add anything? Well, you re-signed Tyler Mott. He's a really, really nice bottom six piece for them. They signed Braden Holtby on a 2-year contract. They didn't really address the letting go of Chris Tanev in a way that I would have liked. obviously you trade for Nate Schmidt. That's a good trade for them. They needed that, I think, because he rounds out the top four where he fills in the hole that Chris Tanev left, right? I really think the more and more I look at the moves I made this offseason, I think Jim Benning looked at this team and said, quite frankly, we are not going to be competing for a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years. So why don't I sign a couple of stopgap guys instead of signing these guys to 6, 4, 5-year deals? Sign a couple of stopgap measures, and then when we're really, really ready to compete, by then, obviously, Demmer will probably be starting goalie.
The cap will probably have gone up. They'll have more wiggle room to really make these moves.
Quinn Hughes will only be better. Uo Levy will, in theory, only be better.
I think the real
forwards will, in theory, only be better. I think this was a move of him looking at the team and saying, look, we're not going to compete this year, so let's instead of having a situation where 2 years from now, okay, we're ready to compete, but now we're in salary cap hell. Just let them walk, and then in 2 years, when you're actually ready to compete, this gives you a lot more wiggle room to fully construct and flesh out that Stanley Cup contender.
Right. I think the real crazy things that I've heard coming out of Vancouver is that Brock Besser was actively getting shopped because of his contract, which I didn't understand all that much. And then Jake Virtanen. Jake Virtanen has been the enigma in Vancouver since they drafted him. I mean, I think he ended up drafting him way higher than I think he was ranked, they ended up going a little off the board for Jake Virtanen. But I still don't think Jake Virtanen's a bad player. I mean, he's a solid middle six guy. He's not making a lot of money. So I just don't understand why they feel the need to get rid of him so much. And fans seem to hate this guy, and I don't get it. He's an RFA right now. But, fans hate the guy, and I don't get it. I mean, he had his best statistical year last year for the team. I think he got close to 20 goals, if not got to 20 goals, and was close to 40 or 50 points, which is pretty much what you want out of him, right? I mean, that's all he develops into. That's fine. So, I don't see the issue there. And like you said, I like the addition of Nate Schmidt. I mean, it really rounds out the team. But, I mean, I still think they're a playoff team. Because of the division being so weak, I really think this still puts them in a really strong position. Because like you said, guys like Bo Horvat, he had a big coming out party in the playoffs, only going to get better. Elias Pettersson, only going to get better. Brock Besser, in theory, only going to get better. So it's okay, JT Miller was amazing for them last year, had his career year, 70 points. He, in theory, if he even gets close to that, next year, 60, 65 points, that's a good year for him.
I mean, it's just one of those things where if you look at the team 2 years from now, Louis Erickson's contract comes off the book. That's huge.
That's giant.
Roussel and Berchi come off the books.
Even Beagle comes off the books in 2 years.
Beagle comes off the books. You probably signed Edler to a cheaper deal than the $6 million you gave him. So I really think that Jim Benning looked at it and said, look, 2 years from now, we're going to have so much wiggle room because all of our bad contracts that we signed basically towards the tail end of the Sedin era to try to keep this team floating, all those contracts are coming off the books, and we're going to be able to compete again in a couple of years. I think they misstepped by not keeping Tyler Toffoli. I think he's young enough that it would have been definitely worth signing him to that contract. I think that was a misplay on their part.
I think letting Troy Stetcher walk also was kind of a misfire on their part. I mean, he's a good bottom six guy, but I guess for the money that he wanted, it wasn't worth it to them. I don't necessarily think they got better. I think they took a step back and took a practical look at the roster and said, we're not going to win a Stanley Cup with this roster just yet. So they signed Braden Holtby. I think that's a confidence boost for Thatcher Demko. A lot of people are like, oh, he's ready to be the full-time starter. But last season when he was the full-time starter for the first time, he had a bit of struggles. And to be fair, that's the first time he's really been the number one guy in the NHL on a playoff-bound team. I mean, that's a lot of pressure for a young guy like him. I mean, then he had to play in the playoffs for them when Markstrom went down with that injury.
And he looked great. But to the same time, you sign Holtby to a 2-year deal. You probably give Demko a little bit more time to adjust fully to the National Hockey League. In 2 years, he will without a doubt be ready to start full-time. And by then, all your bad contracts are coming up, and you're ready to compete. It's just, my gut reaction was, why are they doing this? And then I looked at it and I was like, I can see a plan in place. And I think that's the important part. A lot of these teams, like the Wild, like
San Jose,
the San Jose Sharks, like to a certain extent the Florida Panthers and the Pittsburgh Penguins, I can't really see the plan. There's a very evident plan in place.
And like I said, I think that's why, looking at it now, it's the pragmatic approach that Jim Benning went with makes sense. Because like you said, you look at it, it's like, okay, realistically, they're not going to compete for a Stanley Cup outright. So it's like, why am I going to hamstring myself now and get stuck with all these contracts when in 2 years there are going to be teams in cap crunches looking to move players most likely, and they're going to be in a position to capitalize on that. I mean, it's all about weaponizing cap space, and it always has been, and Vancouver's putting themselves in a position to be able to weaponize as much cap space as possible in their competitive window, which is exactly what you should do. So, I mean, I like it. Like you said, I don't think they got any better, but I still don't think, like, it's a dramatic downgrade. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff. I think they'll still be competitive, and if they miss the playoffs, they miss the playoffs. But I think they'll be playing. I think they'll be playing competitive games into whatever the end of the season would be. So the equivalent of April, which I guess would be June now, June or July.
Conversely, I genuinely think the Calgary Flames might be the most improved team through free agency this year.
I would say so.
You address a massive issue last year, which is your goaltending. And look, it's not for anything against David Riddick or Cam Talbot. They're still both what I would consider good goalies, but they're just way too inconsistent. They would have games where they'd put up like 30 to 40 saves in a shutout, and in the next game they'd let in 5 goals on 20 shots. They needed a guy like Jacob Markstrom, who proved last year he can do it over the course of the entire season. Then they go out and address a big issue for me, which was, they were relying extremely heavily on Mark Giordano last year, who took a huge step back. And granted, the guy was 36 at the start of the season last year, so obviously he wasn't going to put up another Vezina caliber season. I mean, regression hit him like a truck.
I mean, that was the exception to Mark Giordano's career. That year that he won the Norris Trophy is the exception, not necessarily the rule. Because, I mean, generally, as you get older, you do not get better. No. Once you get north of 30, 31, it's generally you start to regress. And it's just, I mean, your body physically can't keep up with the rigor of the game like the way it could when you were 25, 26. It's the truth. I still think he's valuable to them. I mean, not for the 6.7 that he's making, but I still think he's valuable enough.
Right. But you sign a guy like Tanev who can take a little bit of the pressure, take some of those penalty-killing minutes off of his hands.
Some of those matchup minutes away, yeah.
Essentially, Tanev is a replacement for Travis Hamonic, who they haven't signed to this point. He's a UFA. I'm not going to say that Tanev is any better than Travis Hamonic, but what he's better at is staying in the lineup. Hamonic has had a lot of injury problems over the years, and it started with his last 2 seasons in New York, where he got a concussion and he had a leg issue. He plays a very heavy game, and unfortunately, he's had a lot of issues staying in the lineup. So you bring a guy like Chris Tanev in who can stay in the lineup pretty much all 82 games, no problem. Take a lot of those penalty-killing minutes away from Mark Giordano. Kind of stabilize the back end a little bit. I mean, I'm still not in love with their defensive core, but it definitely stabilizes it in a way. And, they made some noise in the playoffs last year in a year where Johnny Gaudreau, for a lot of it, was kind of absent. So if he can find, that 30-goal pace that we know he can put up again, they're only going to get better. And I genuinely think that they're one of, if not the best or most improved teams in the offseason this year.
I think they're going to win the division. I mean,
I think so too.
I mean, I could see this roster beating out the Vegas Golden Knights for number 1 in the division. I mean, I think their forward core is still really good. I mean, Milan Lucic is still on that awful contract, but like it is what it is. He was, for what it's worth, he was actually an effective player for the Calgary Flames in the playoffs last year. I mean, it looked like shades of Boston Bruin and Milan Lucic. Does he have the offense he used to have? Of course not. No way. But I think he knows that, and I think his time at Edmonton was marked by they wanted that big power forward Luch to come from Boston, and he signed that big contract, and then they didn't get it, so he had to go, right? And they take on James Neal's contract, which also was awful, but Luch comes in and actually has an effective year as, a third, fourth line grinding, checking forward. And I think, what the hell was his name? Sam Bennett was supposed to be a big high-end player. Turned out he rounded out his game. He's more of a pest now. He's more of a grinding, hard-nosed of the grindstone player. I mean, I really like this roster a lot. I mean, down the middle, they're solid. On the wings, they're solid. And Matthew Tkachuk is only going to get better.
He's 22. It's hard to believe he's only 22.
I mean, he scores a between the legs one-timer to win the game in overtime. And, he's only going to get better. He might be the best player on this team, honestly.
Yeah, and they addressed a lot of their issues.
Do they still have TJ Brody?
No.
They let him
TJ
walk?
Brody is a Toronto Maple Leaf now.
Ah.
Which we will get to the Toronto Maple Leafs right after this. Actually, there's one other team in the West I want to specifically talk about. But yeah, I really like the Calgary Flames. I like what they did here. I think they recognized some obvious holes in the lineup, and they went out and got the players to fix it. And they got two very effective players at doing that. And even better, at the expense of a division rival. So, I do want to talk about the Jets because it was very interesting that we talked about desperately needing a second-line center. Why the hell did they let Paul Stastny go? I don't understand it. Well, guess who's back? The Winnipeg Jets trade for Paul Stastny from the Vegas Golden Knights. Again, another cap move for the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas gets Carl Dahlstrom, who's 25 years old, 2013 second-round pick. He was projecting at this point to be maybe a bottom six, most likely a career AHLer, and a 2022 fourth-round pick. This is a fantastic trade for the Winnipeg Jets. It gives Cole Perfetti time. He doesn't necessarily need to rush
into the NHL right now.
Into the NHL, but more specifically, into that second line role. If they really want to sign him and play him on the third line, take some of those heavier minutes, give them to Paul Stastny, give Perfetti maybe second line power play time, something to ease him into instead of just being like, okay, look, you're now Patrick Laine's line mate, go play with him. It's just like, I think he could do it. I think he's a good enough player to do it, but we saw such great things from Paul Stastny in his original tenure with the Winnipeg Jets that we were both baffled when they let him go, and
he's back.
Guess who's back?
I mean, they let him walk because I think in their mind they're like, okay, we can get another guy. They go out and get Kevin Hayes, doesn't work. Let him. They trade his rights to the Philadelphia Flyers. He signs that massive contract, right? Paul Stastny's still making a lot of money. But it's only 1 year. 1 year, 6.5, and if it works, you keep him. This is like been the glaring hole in the Winnipeg Jets outside of like their defensive struggles, which is a whole other issue when you let 3 of your top 4 defensemen all walk in 1 year, or trade 1, let 2 walk, however you go about it, right?
Byfuglien just disappears off the face of the earth.
Dustin Byfuglien decides he just doesn't want to. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Dustin Byfuglien's an asshole. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Like, I'm not going to pull any punches about it. I really liked him as a player. I liked what he did with the Winnipeg Jets. I thought he was one of the most effective players for them in the playoffs those 2 years. I thought he was one of the most effective players in general. But he's an asshole. Like, he knew he had this injury, and the team knew he had the injury, and the team wanted him to come to camp so they could then put him on the injured reserve and let him heal. But he decided just to get the surgery on his own, which the team, it put the team in a terrible spot because they had to suspend him because he couldn't report to camp. I don't understand why he didn't just wait, come to camp, say, listen, I'm injured. He would have failed all of his physicals because they would have seen the ankle injury, and he would have went right on the injured reserve, and he could have won an long-term injured reserve, and they could have done something. They could have put him on LTIR, and they could have maybe kept the guy that went to Montreal.
Ben Sherratt.
Yeah, Ben Sherratt. They could have kept Ben Sherratt. Maybe they wouldn't have had to trade Jacob Trouba. I mean, Jacob Trouba wanted to go to an American team anyway. That's the whole issue there. But the theory is they could have had the money to do things. He hamstrung them. They had to suspend him, and he continued to count against their cap, which screwed them into having to trade Jacob Trouba coming off a career year and let Ben Sherratt walk away. So I think he's a big dickhead for that. But the Paul Stastny pickup, amazing. I think it's incredible. I really got to give Kevin Cheveldayoff a lot of credit because he knew what they needed. He drafted a player that projects to be that guy, and then he said, well, maybe we shouldn't just bank on this kid being able to play. We know what Paul does. We know how good Paul was for us. He's a little older now, but, I mean, his chemistry with Patrick Laine was second to none. He's a pass-first kind of player, which is exactly what Laine needs.
And I got him for nothing.
And I think this takes Laine off the block too. I really think the combination of the Cole Perfetti draft pick and to trade for Paul Stastny makes me think that they've addressed their issues and that both him and Nikolai Ehlers are just out of trade talks now, because they really only need to improve on defense, and they can do that internally. They just need guys like Sami Niku to just continue to get better. And by the end of last year, after his trial run early in the season, he came back up. He was good. He wasn't lighting the league on fire, but he wasn't terrible. And he's a rookie. He was a second-round pick in 2019, I think. So he's only going to get better. Neil Pionk's only going to get better. Josh Morrissey had a great year. He's only going to get better. So, and
they managed to keep Nathan Beaulieu as well,
who's a good pick. So not a nice little piece. And you have Connor Hellebuck. easily a Vezina Trophy candidate every year.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen him maybe try to get, maybe try to pick up a more stalwart, either defenseman or somebody with a little bit of snarl. Like maybe you pick up a guy like Mark Borowiecki or Radko Gudas if you want a little bit of snarl on your back end, or Zach Bogosian.
Even Eric Gustafsson was available. Like,
there's also Luke Shen, a guy who proved that he's a bottom pairing defenseman. He kind of proved to the NHL that he can still play on that bottom six role.
Well, after that terrible run he had in Toronto and Philly, yeah.
I would have liked to have seen him maybe take a cheap flyer, a 1 or 2 year contract on one of these guys, because really I think at this point that's really the only hole on this team. I mean, that top six is one of, if not the best top sixes in the NHL. I mean, Mark Scheifele, Nikolai Ehlers, Blake Wheeler, Paul Stastny, Kyle Connor, and Patrick Laine. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And like you said, they have one of the best goalies in the NHL in Connor Hellebuck. Really the only glaring issue. And they have, puck-moving offensive defensemen. The only real issue is they don't really have, like, a Victor Hedman. They don't have your Alex Pietrangelo type player. That matchup, shutdown type defenseman. I would have liked to have seen them, if they think that they have somebody in the system that can be that, take a flyer on a guy like Luke Shen or Zach Bogosian, Radko Gudas, Mark Borowiecki for a little bit of breathing room, make Connor Hellebuck's life a little bit easier. That being said, unfortunately for the Jets, they're still in the Central Division, which is one of the best divisions in hockey. But I think that addressing that second line center role for basically nothing, you go up a fourth and some guy, some 25-year-old who's like
kind of okay.
I think that's a fantastic trade. They took advantage of a Golden Knights team that was in desperate need of a trade. And I think that this puts the Jets back into the discussion for a bubble Stanley Cup contending team.
I mean, they're a surefire playoff team now, in my opinion. I mean,
you would have to think, right? Like that they'll manage to, even in that tough Central Division, I don't think that they're going to take a divisional spot. I think that the Blues...
It'll be a wild card, probably.
I think the Blues, Avs, and Stars kind of have that, monopoly on that at the moment. But I can definitely see them being the first wild card team. I think they're better than most teams in the Pacific.
I realistically could see them even knocking St. Louis into a wild card, just because I think St. Louis took a big step back. I mean...
Well, the big question mark is Jordan Binnington. What are you going to get out of him this year?
Well, that's it. Jordan Binnington's proven to be... I mean, outside of his playoff run where he lost his job to Jake Allen... Through most of the regular season, he'd been pretty inconsistent. There were stretches where he was not very good, and he was hot. He ran hot and cold. So if that's the playbook on Jordan Binnington, I could see St. Louis maybe squeaking out a wild card. The other thing with St. Louis is you lose your captain, your number one power play, number one penalty kill, matchup defenseman in Alex Pietrangelo, who, they did everything. They desperately tried to keep him. They offered him everything they could, and he still said no.
Because they weren't everything in the kitchen sink at the guy.
They weren't willing to pierce the $8 million. They weren't willing to go 9 for the 8 years, and Vegas was willing to give him the 8x8, the 8.8. So, I mean, they got Torrey Krug, who is a nice piece. There's nothing wrong with Torrey Krug. It's just that Torrey Krug doesn't bring the same shutdown ability or X factors to the table that Alex Pietrangelo did. I mean, he's your captain. There's a reason he's your captain.
On the ice, Krug kind of reminds me of like Pietrangelo light,
I mean, kind of.
He does a lot of the same things, just Pietrangelo does them a little bit better.
And Pietrangelo also brings the size to it. Pietrangelo's, I think, 6'3", 215 pounds. He's a big guy. Torrey Krug, I think, is like 5'9", 5'10". He's not very big by any stretch.
This is also, by the way, coming from a guy who loves Torrey Krug, and I really wanted the Islanders to sign him, but of course,
I mean, this
this
isn't a knock on Torrey Krug by any stretch. I like Torrey Krug a lot. It's just that Torrey Krug isn't Alex Pietrangelo.
Right.
I mean, it's like, it's just not. I mean, it's a good signing. Don't get me wrong. St. Louis struck out on the big fish and still got a big fish out of it. They didn't catch the halibut, but they caught a tuna. So like.
I do want to ask you, a lot has been made about what Torrey Krug said about the Boston Bruins.
I didn't even see this. What did he say?
He went on record and said everything you've heard about... He essentially said the Bruins were liars.
Ooh.
He went on record and he said, I didn't have an offer from the Boston Bruins. He said at the start of free agency, he said, I had an offer during the regular season. and then at the start of free agency, I no longer had an offer from the Boston Bruins. Which
Interesting.
is exactly the opposite of what we heard from the Bruins, who have been saying we offered Krug 6x6, and he basically went on record and said, "I had no offer from the Boston Bruins."
So does that mean that negotiations had broken down, and then when he went to re-engage in negotiation, they were just like, "We don't want to talk to you anymore," or then they pulled the offer from him?
That's what I'm getting. The impression that I'm getting is that when the Ekman-Larsson talks heated up, they probably pulled their offer from Torrey Krug.
Right. And then when they struck out on that and Torrey Krug was like, "Hey, do you still want to talk?" they still, for some reason, pulled the rug. I mean, actually, I'd imagine at that point they probably called Torrey Krug's agent, and Torrey Krug had no interest in probably talking to them after realizing that they pulled the offer on him.
Let me see if I can pull up the exact quote.
Yeah, I didn't see this. That's interesting.
A lot of people have been making a big deal about this.
I mean,
somebody on the Bruins, I forget who it was, actually, they asked the guy about it, and he was like, when we play him, I'm going to tell him to keep his head up, like as if he like spited the Boston Bruins.
I mean, he's just telling the truth. I mean, the Boston Bruins as an organization have historically not been the most forthright or on. I mean, no team is the most honest, right? Nobody's gonna come out and just be like, "Yeah, no, we didn't offer him a contract."
So he said, the 29-year-old defenseman said he got an offer from the Bruins about a year ago, and then they pulled it. There was nothing, no communication, nothing happened. To be honest, it was kind of not expected, but as the day went on, it just seemed more and more like a perfect fit for me to go to the Blues. Once I had an opportunity to be a Blue, I had to take a chance and jump on it. So it sounds to me like they pulled the offer from him when the Ekman-Larsson talks heated up, and then they didn't talk to him at all.
Can we talk about that Ekman-Larsson thing? I think it's stupid.
I think it made sense for the Canucks to be in on it, but I didn't understand why
the Canucks have an obvious
on
need. It. I mean, he would be their power play trigger man easily. He'd probably play on their second pairing behind Quinn Hughes, because you don't want to play Quinn Hughes with Ekman-Larsson. I mean, Quinn Hughes is great, but like he's not stalwart in his own end. He needs somebody like Edler who can play a little bit in their own end, keep the puck moving forward, so Quinn can keep playing, rushing the puck. I mean, it would have been a nice fit. I don't understand it from the Boston Bruins' perspective, just because of the money involved. I mean, Ekman-Larsson's making $8 million or something crazy.
I think he's making like 8.5. I think he's like about $2 million more expensive than Torrey Krug.
Right, and honestly,
I'd rather have Torrey Krug.
Torrey Krug brings a lot more to the game than Ekman-Larsson. Ekman-Larsson's good, don't get me wrong. I like him a lot, but Torrey Krug's more proven to be more physical despite his small stature. He's willing to, go into the dirty areas and play, behind his own goal line and get the puck. Whereas, Ekman-Larsson's not as effective at doing things like that. Which, for the Boston Bruins, I don't know why you would dump a guy like Krug, which you can sign for $2 million less and not have to give up any assets to get. And he's a product of your system. He developed with the Bruins. I remember when he came up in 2013, right out of college, killed the Rangers in the playoffs. Never forget it. So I don't know why you wouldn't keep a guy like that. He's proven to be like a heart and soul kind of guy. He leaves everything on the ice. I mean, Stanley Cup final last year, he threw that huge hit on, was it Vince Dunn? Robert Thomas is right. Knocked Robert Thomas out of the playoffs, or out of a couple games. Then he threw that other hit and hit Vince Dunn, took Vince Dunn out for a game or two with that giant hit. Like,
he's a Boston Bruin.
He's a Bruin. Like, he fits perfectly. He checks all the boxes for a Boston Bruin, and he brings a level of offense that they don't really have outside of Charlie McAvoy.
Well, I was gonna ask, like, really, when was the last time? I'm really struggling to think here. When was the last time the Bruins made a move for a pure blood offensive defenseman and had it work?
Never. They're usually always developed internally. The last guy I can think of is Ray Bourque.
I really can't think of a time when, and again, this is also, I mean, I'm 23 years old, right? So I wasn't alive like the Bobby Orr days, right? So it's like, really, in the last 10 years, I can't think of a guy that was a true blood offensive defenseman. Torrey Krug's not a true blood offensive defenseman. McAvoy's not an offensive defenseman. Chara's never been an offensive defenseman.
Chara can get like 10 goals, and that's just because he can shoot so hard.
I can't think of a time when they had a player like an Ekman-Larsson.
Which maybe is why they went for it, because maybe they thought they needed something. But I don't think Ekman-Larsson fits with the construction of the roster. The roster is built to be heavy
he's not hard to play against.
No, he's not. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like it doesn't fit with the way the Boston Bruins have traditionally been playing hockey. And even Bobby Orr was tough to play against.
And there's a certain thought process where you look at the Bruins and say, okay, they've been to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 times in the last 10 years. 3 times?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 times in the last 10 years.
They only walked away with the 1 victory.
They won the 1 time. So clearly the way they've been doing things has been working, so why not keep doing it the way they're doing it?
Right.
The other thought process is, well, they've always been missing that one thing, and maybe it is the offensive defenseman. But in this current situation, it doesn't make sense. Look, if Torrey Krug didn't exist, and they just had $6 million of cap floating around that they could, make some moves, turn into 8.5, and get Ekman Larsson, sure, I think that's a fantastic way. It's kind of like going back to the Vegas Golden Knights thing. Why are you making 13 different moves to address an issue that isn't really even an issue? The Bruins, nobody looked at the Bruins defense last year and said that's why they lost.
The real issue with the Bruins is they've never been like a high scoring team, right? Never in their career. Like maybe going back to the days of the big bad Bruins in the 70s when Phil Esposito scored 76 goals, right? And you had Bobby Orr. But then you look at them in the 80s, still one of the most successful teams in that decade with Ray Bourque. They go to 3 Stanley Cup Finals, lose almost all of them to the Edmonton Oilers. I think it was 88, 90, and then some other one, maybe earlier than that. But so, I don't think that was the issue. I really don't. I don't think adding Ekman Larsson makes them any better. I think it makes them worse. I think keeping Torrey Krug would have made sense. And the real thing they were missing in goal scoring has been made up for by Brad Marchand and David Pasternak. The real thing that the Achilles heel in the playoffs for them this year was the goaltending. Was the fact that, Halak came in and had to come in cold, and they ran into a hot team and they didn't lose to the Lightning. Yeah, they lost to the Lightning, right?
I honestly don't even think that you can look at the Bruins and say, oh, there's a glaring issue. It's just they just lost to a better team.
They ran into the Tampa Bay Lightning. like the Tampa Bay Lightning were on they were destined.
They were on a mission
win.
From God. Like
honestly, yeah. To quote the Blues Brothers, yeah, they were on a mission from God. Like they got gassed by the Columbus Blue Jackets. Then they come back this year and knock the Blue Jackets out of the playoffs, which is their dragon. They slayed the dragon in the first round, and then I think everything after that, which is icing on the cake. They just continue to be better.
Jackets in 5, Bruins in 5, Islanders in 6. Dallas Stars in 6. Not a single team took them to Game 7. The closest team to beating them was the Islanders, who took them to Game 6 overtime.
Right.
And okay, sure, you can make the argument that game could have gone either way. They could have forced the Game 7. Point being, they didn't play a single Game 7 all playoffs.
They played but they also played some of them. They played in terms of time on ice some of the most. They played some of the longest time in the playoffs. They spent the most time on the ice out of other teams.
When your game 1 is 5 overtimes,
and then you play 2 more double overtime games in that series, so you've essentially played
helps a little bit.
You've played 9 overtime periods in 5 games. It's ridiculous. But to your point, like the Bruins realistically didn't have to let Torrey Krug go, and for them to just
end up with nothing. They ended up with nothing out of the whole deal. Because they didn't pull the trigger fast enough on the deal. Ekman Larsson said, look, if I'm not traded by the start of free agency, I'm not going anywhere. They didn't pull the trigger fast enough. And at that point, you ruined your relationship with Torrey Krug because he hadn't heard from you in about a year, according to him. And I just want to go on record. Anybody that's disparaging Torrey Krug for what he says, he's just telling you like it is. He didn't come out and say the Bruins are a trash organization and I hated my time there and screw them and blah, blah, blah. He's probably really hurt by the whole thing. I mean, he played his entire career there, and for them to pull an offer from him and then not talk to him, not even circle back and say, hey, Torrey, listen, I know you've been hearing the rumors about Ekman Larsson. I just want you to know that I'm not treating you like a second option, but I would still like to have you here if we could have the cap space, blah, blah, blah. For them to pull an offer from you and then not talk to you at all from the team that drafted you and basically raised you and turned you into the player that you are, that probably hurt. And he didn't come out and say the Bruins suck, screw them, trash organization. He just said, look, guys, I didn't have an offer from them, and I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty classless move from the Boston Bruins. To A, lie to him, and then B, lie to everyone else, because all we heard was the Bruins are in on Torrey Krug, they're circling back. He must have been reading all those tweets like, what the hell are they talking about?
They haven't called my agent in a year.
And that's a pretty garbage move from the Boston Bruins, in my opinion.
Yeah. It'd be like the Rangers not telling Henrik Lundqvist they're going to buy him out. It'd be like the Rangers being like, and see you later, kid. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, what? But like I said, like, there seems like they're making moves for the sake of making moves, and it's also like they were trading for the idea of Ekman Larson, right? Like what he like represents more than what the actual player. Because the player you're getting isn't the player he was. He's not the Ekman Larson of 2013, 2014.
He's not 26 years old anymore.
Right. He's getting close to 30, if not already 30. And that's a huge contract. Like, he's not worth $8.5 million right now. And I think, from what I read, I gathered, because when the trade talk started heating up, I started reading what the Arizona media was saying about him and what their perception of Ekman Larson was. And they couldn't believe that teams were so in on the guy and wanted to give so much up for Ekman Larson when they've watched him for the last so many years, and he hasn't been that guy that teams think he is. And I think that's part of the media, the media blackout that is Arizona, right? Like, nobody really watches those games. I mean, you and I don't watch them, and we watch a lot of hockey, but Arizona always comes on at 10 p.m. and it's like,
it's also one of those things where it's like, and I don't want to use this term lightly because I know everyone says this about the New York Islanders. It's not that the Coyotes are boring. It's that the Coyotes are so underwhelming for what they should be. Like, my expectations for an Arizona Coyotes game were so high last year. I mean, we talked about at the beginning of the season. I was like, yo, they're going to get second in the Pacific Division. They're going to be a force this year. I'm really excited to watch them.
Then they got Taylor Hall, and we were like, wow, this is really it, man. They're going to do it.
You know, I'm going to watch Taylor Hall play with Phil Kessel. I'm going to watch Jacob Chikrin play with Ekman Larson. And then you watch the game, and it's like, it's like when you go into an Islanders game, you're like, all right, you're probably going to see like maybe 40 shots total. It's going to be Islanders hockey, right? So your expectations are Islanders hockey. You go into a game, watch the Coyotes the last season, I was like, yo, all right, Clayton Keller, you know, Phil Kessel, Chikrin, Ronta, Kemper. All right, it's going to be dope. I'm going to watch a lot of Coyotes games. And you go in, it's just like
they were just
an underachieving 500 ho-hum hockey team.
And then they make the playoffs by some miracle, because they were sliding way out of the playoff picture, and then they get absolutely destroyed by the Colorado Avalanche in 5 games.
That series was a joke.
Was it? Yeah, it was 5 games. So the Coyotes managed to get past the Wild, right?
Predators.
The Predators, that's what it was.
Because Darcy Kemper carried them, made legitimately, I think he made 40-plus saves the last 3 games of that series. Carried them into the series with the Avalanche. Game 1 looked really close until the floodgates opened, and then the rest of that series was a total joke.
And they only managed to win 1 game by total fluke.
Yeah, I mean, that series was just a punch in the face.
So it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I do want to talk about 2 Eastern Conference teams specifically. There are other teams. We'll just make a small note about, like, you know, the Blackhawks and Jonathan Taza came out that he was surprised by the offseason moves, not signing Corey Crawford, and they have said they're going into the season with Malcolm Subban and forget the other guy's name on the roster. They're going to compete for the starting job. I think, you know, you kind of had to see this coming. It's not a rebuild, but it's definitely a motion to retool. And after, you know, the season that they had last year, I think that's the smart thing to do. Still don't know what the Wild are doing. They signed Cam Talbot. That doesn't move the needle for me. I don't know what the Sharks are doing. They trade for Devin Dubnyk. I have no earthly idea. They bought back Patrick Marleau as if that's going to change anything.
So here's my thing about the Blackhawks, the Jonathan Taves thing. I just don't understand from his perspective where he didn't see this coming.
Right.
Like, this has been, the writing's been on the wall since realistically like 2015, 2016. After they traded Artemi Panarin for Brendan Saad, the writing was realistically on the wall, right? And then you end up having to trade Brendan Saad for Nikita Zadorov.
Which, like, I mean, that's a great move for both teams, I think.
I mean, I like to trade both ways. I think
I'm not in love with the fact that the Avalanche got rid of really their only defensive defenseman.
For Brendan Saad, which is like, oh, what?
I'm not in. I got to be honest. I'm not in love with that Colorado defense at the moment.
Yeah, no.
I thought Zadorov was the perfect foil for that team, the perfect top 4, hard hitting, hard checking defensive defenseman, and they were like, "We're gonna get depth scoring." It's like, that's not your problem.
I mean, we saw it in the playoffs. Zadorov was incredibly effective for them in those, you know, 2 the actual legitimate playoff rounds they played. I mean, so I didn't get that either, but Jonathan Taves, like, I don't know if this is just his way of trying to get, like, you know, a chip on their shoulder, like a collective chip. It's us against them, which is what John Tortorella did to great effect with Columbus, which was, hey, nobody thinks we're going to do anything. It's us against them, all this kind of stuff. But for Jonathan Toews to like publicly question the direction of his team and his general manager like that doesn't bode well for me personally. I don't think if you're Stan Bowman and you have Jonathan Toews, 29, 30-year-old Jonathan Toews questioning your direction. I mean, let's be honest. The rumor is Jonathan Toews isn't going to finish his career in Chicago anyway. All the signs point to him probably getting moved at some point in the next couple of years because that contract is massive and the return on it isn't what it used to be. I mean, Jonathan Toews' intangibles and X factors were all important when they were competing for Stanley Cups and, developing young players. But, like, as they start to move more into what should be their second competitive window with, Dylan Strome and Dominic Kubalik and Alex Nylander, it's him or Kane, and you're not going to trade Patrick Kane. You just don't. You just can't. And Jonathan Toews might be the captain, but still have Duncan Keith. Duncan Keith can be the captain. It doesn't really, So I just think for him, if anything, this just opens the door more to the possibility for Stan Bowman to realistically look to try and move maybe Jonathan Toews to somebody else. Take that $7.5 million and send it to a team that's looking to compete that needs, a number one or like a 1B center.
I mean, on the right team, if Colorado didn't have Nazem Kadri, I would say Colorado would be like a perfect fit for a guy like him.
I mean, Dallas would be nice.
Dallas would definitely be nice. I mean, before the Paul Stastny trade, you could have looked at Winnipeg maybe.
I mean, not even Edmonton. I was going to say, I can't even think.
You could have traded him to Edmonton, shift Draisaitl back up to the first line, and then use Jonathan Toews as a shut-down second-line center, which is
pretty much what he did.
If you're not going to invest in your defense in terms of defensemen, maybe invest in your defense a little bit in your forwards. If you're so hell-bent on being puck-moving defense, okay, fine, go get a shut-down center.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just thought those comments were strange, especially considering like the direction of the team has been very clear for the last 3-4 years.
And sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say just like especially since like they trade away Artemi Panarin, they bring in Brendan Saad, they trade for Dylan Strome, Dominic Kubalik comes in, Adam Boquist is playing. Like all the moves point to getting younger, and for him to not like, I wouldn't have signed Corey Crawford. I was a Chicago Blackhawks. I have almost no reason to. He's 35. He's not the goaltender he used to be, and the unnecessary pressure on him from the fans of the organization is just not something I would want to put him through personally, because they expect 28, 29-year-old Corey Crawford who's winning them Stanley Cups, and he's not that guy, so he can go to New Jersey now, and the expectation isn't as high. So it's good for him. It's good for the Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks have to start over in net. Give Malcolm Subban the reins. See if he can take the starting job, and if he falters, then you explore your options in free agency or via trade, or via the draft maybe. I don't see why they couldn't call up Florida and be like, hey, Jonathan Toews for Spencer Knight in a first, or figure something of that caliber. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because realistically, they're going to need a goaltender. Like Florida's got a logjam in net, and Jonathan Toews is kind of making himself look like he doesn't either want to be in Chicago for a rebuild or isn't ready for a rebuild in Chicago, which isn't great if your captain isn't on board with the direction of your team.
I can understand him making these comments if, maybe he wasn't told. I mean, look, as a general manager, you don't owe your players anything to a certain extent. You have to look at it from the business of hockey.
I mean, if it doesn't directly affect them, then you have no reason to communicate to Jonathan Toews your ideas or your plan.
There is a precedent that with franchise players that, especially your captain, that he's in on the loop. A lot of general managers talk like that. They will talk to, their big name players and kind of let them know what's going on, because especially for a guy like Toews who's been there his whole career, he knows how the organization works. He can be kind of the eyes on the ice that the GM might not have. The GM might be looking at things from like an analytics standpoint. He can be like, listen, we need this, right? We need a second line winger, for example, right? And the GM's like, well, we have this guy, the analytics problem. He's like, it's not working, right?
Right.
So if he wasn't told, I can understand him being a little upset, because to a certain extent, I mean, he's a leader, and he is one of the great Chicago Blackhawks. That being said, for him to kind of say, I don't know why we're rebuilding, is a little bit silly. It's like, Really? You're in a division with the Avalanche, the Blues, and the Stars, and you don't know why you're rebuilding?
You
Like,
even have the Jets in your division, like,
you won 3 Stanley Cups in 5 years.
and then the bubble burst, like.
So, there was that whole situation. I do want to talk. I want to touch on Henrik Lundqvist. Just I want to pick your brain about that, and then I do want to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if there's anything after that specifically that you wanted to talk about, we can wrap up with that. But just give me your overall thoughts on Henrik Lundqvist going to the Capitals. In my opinion, I think it's a good idea because the Capitals are still in a competitive window, and to just hand the reins to a sophomore goaltender who played only like 30 games last year and just be like, here, go lead a Stanley Cup contending team. It's like,
I mean, I can see why they did it. I just hope that they have a realistic expectation of Henrik Lundqvist, and they're not expecting to get Washington Capital killer Henrik Lundqvist, because he's not that guy. He hasn't been that guy in 3 years. He's 38 now. He's just not that guy. So, I think it's a good move on paper, right? It really just boils down to how well does Henrik Lundqvist adjust to the new goaltending coach, because he's never had anybody other than Benoit Allaire working with him, and how well does he adjust to a better defensive team in the Washington Capitals? And I think he'll be fine. I think he'll platoon probably with Samsonov.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see either one of them getting a number 1 title unless Henrik Lundqvist somehow manages to pull out 2014 form and win the win the Vezina Trophy, which is just, let's be honest, it's just not going to happen. I mean, it could happen, but like realistically, the expectation isn't there. So I think if they temper their expectations to be realistic and say, listen, if we can get 35, 40 games out of Henrik Lundqvist and he can win us 20 to 25 of those games, that's all we need. That's fine. And he'll do that, and he can do that easily for you. But if you're expecting him to come in and start 60 to 65 games and win 35 of them, or 40 of them, like he used to for the Rangers, it's just not going to happen. It just isn't. So, I understand why they had to walk away from Holtby. The money just wasn't there, and they got Henrik Lundqvist for $1.5 million on a 1-year deal. Especially after they signed Backstrom to his extension, which, again, you can't let Nicholas Backstrom walk. You just can't. So, I mean...
And they got him on a pretty good deal, too. So
yeah, isn't it like 7?
It's like 7 something, yeah.
Yeah, that's not bad. For your number 1, your franchise playmaker. And like, come on.
I'm a little surprised that they didn't go knocking on the door of somebody like Thomas Greiss. I thought Thomas Greiss was the perfect fit in Washington. I thought maybe Cam Talbot was an option.
I think what's interesting about the whole thing with Henrik Lundqvist was essentially pretty much as soon as the Rangers uttered the word buyout, leading into the buyout window, and we all knew Henrik Lundqvist wasn't going to be a New York Ranger come, not July 1st, but what is essentially should have been July 1st.
It was like almost immediately.
Yeah, the rumor immediately started that he was talking to the Washington Capitals. So it leads me to believe that the Washington Capitals had reached out to the Rangers at some point and said, hey, we know you don't want him. Can we, talk to his agent and see if we can work something out? Which, if the Rangers are saying, well, we're going to buy him out anyways, yeah, well, go ahead. Like, you're not going to trade for him, so, yeah, go ahead, we're going to buy him out. So it leads me to believe that there was some communication either among him and the Washington Capitals beforehand, and I'm not going to make any allegations because that would be considered tampering. But if the Rangers gave their blessing because, hey, we're buying him out, who cares? I mean, he signed at 12:01 on the start of the free agency. He was one of the first guys to sign a contract. He didn't play the field. He didn't see what gauge the interest. He had. To his credit,
to think that
I think he knew with the market. I think he understood that listen, this one team has a lot of interest in me right now, and instead of playing the market and seeing what happens, they want me. I'll just sign.
I think he knows that he doesn't have the leverage of some of these other guys. A guy even a guy like Thomas Greiss has a little bit of leverage because he's been a consistently good 1B goalie. I think Henrik Lundqvist was probably taking the first guy that came to his door. And I also think it just works out. He stays on the East Coast. He doesn't have to move his family all that far. It's only about 5 hours down to Washington,
He doesn't
D.C.
really have to move his family at all. They could stay here.
Yeah, it's a 1-year contract. It's not like he's going to be across the country. He's not going to Canada. He's going to Washington, D.C. So if they have a couple days off, if he really wanted to, he could just drive or fly home to New York. He's not going all the way to Anaheim or something like that. And it's a competing team. He has a chance to win a Stanley Cup.
Which is what he wants and what he deserves. He deserves a Stanley Cup. Do I think Washington's going to win it next year? It's hard to say. I don't, you have to see where the rest of this roster shakes out. They're not the class of the East anymore. That's we'll put it that way. They're a bubble Stanley Cup team.
They're kind of reminding me of the early 2010s Capitals, to always make it to the second round, Washington Capitals.
Which, I mean, listen, they won their Stanley Cup in the Ovechkin era, so, like, it doesn't matter, right? They got their Stanley Cup. But I don't think this moves the needle for them at all. I think this kind of just keeps them in the same position they were last year, which is a solid team, really good team, probably going to win the division. I can see the Islanders beating them for the division, honestly. If the Islanders manage to somehow figure out a way to get their team signed, the Islanders might win the division.
I'm just not in love with... actually, they don't have a coach yet, do they?
Do they? I don't think so.
Because they fired Reardon.
Well, they had to fire Reardon. I mean, he was terrible.
So I think it really depends on who they have behind the bench. That's my main concern with them. I think that the roster on paper is a Stanley Cup caliber team, which is like... It just goes to show you last year when Todd Reardon like coached them into a wall.
I really think they should have taken a swing on Peter Laviolette. I don't see why that wouldn't have worked. I mean, he likes offense. He likes to push the pace. He likes...
I love defense.
Like, you know, why not? He got Philly. He got a pretty mediocre Philly team pretty deep into the playoffs a couple of times. And on top of that, he took Nashville to the Stanley Cup final. So he proves he can take a good team and he's won a Stanley Cup. He won it with Carolina. He's gotten over the hump. So, you know, second winningest coach of all time in American history. He did sign somewhere, but I don't know why Washington didn't, you know, take a flyer on him or just call up his camp and be like, hey, you know, Todd, things might not work out between us and Todd, so, you know, keep your ears open. Just to, you know, make sure he stays on the market and doesn't sign with another team because you want the option. But now they've pretty much walked themselves into, well, who's really available as a coach? Gerard Gallant? Like, he's a good coach, but not for that team. He's good for, like, a meat and potatoes hockey team that really doesn't have a lot of talent because he just makes them play simple, hard hockey. That's why Vegas was so successful. It's why I think he should have went to Florida because Florida would be the perfect fit for him.
Yeah, they're in a weird spot.
This got off topic. Yeah, the whole Henrik Lundqvist thing, I think it works. I mean, I don't think it moves the needle for the Washington Capitals.
No. I do, but okay, so I do want to wrap up, or not wrap up, but do you have any other specific teams you want to talk about?
No, we can talk about the Maple Leafs. Let's end on the Maple Leafs.
I really quickly, just real quick, I want to just kind of boast a little bit. You know, I want to kind of toot our own horns here because it really does seem like what we said would happen with Montreal has happened with Montreal, where they knocked out the Penguins in the qualifiers and they got this huge ego boost out of nowhere because they signed, Tyler Toffoli. They signed, Jake Allen to a contract extension that kicks in after next season. They signed Brendan Gallagher to a contract extension that kicks in after next season.
They traded Max Domi for Josh Anderson and then signed him to that 7-year extension.
It just seems to me like all indications are Montreal Canadian management still thinks they can compete. And it's really weird to me because we said that there are certain teams that should look at last year as a fluke, and there are certain teams that should look at last year as a stepping stone. And it's really weird because, ironically, a lot of the teams that should look at it one way are looking at it the other way. I think Vancouver, to a certain extent, looked at that season and said this was kind of fluky, so they took a step back, took a real hard look at their roster and said this is what we need to do. I think to a certain extent they should have looked at it as more of a stepping stone than they did. They probably, in my opinion, they should have kept Tyler Toffoli. They maybe could have kept Chris Tanev, but I can understand why they let those guys go.
Right.
Montreal took what was essentially, they should have looked at it as a fluke and took a real hard look at the roster and said this is not good enough, and instead are using it as a stepping stone, but that stepping stone leads you off a cliff. And I don't understand where the roster is. I can't see the vision for this roster. I don't know where this is going. You have all these real long-term contracts now combined with these older or aging veteran players, and I don't get it.
I think the big question mark is like what do they want to be?
What are you building towards?
Like all the moves they made, like all the types of players they brought in are all all very drastically different kinds of players, right? Tyler Toffoli is more of a goal scorer, more of like he's a perimeter shooter. He's a good for that kind of thing. Bring in Josh Anderson. He plays a heavy two-way kind of game. Guy can't stay healthy though. That's the big thing. Josh Anderson, when he is in the lineup, is an effective second line, third line player. Probably more of a second line player because he did almost reach 30 goals that year. But the guy can't stay healthy. He's played collectively like 40 games in the last 2 or 3 seasons. Like he's always hurt. And you trade away Max Domi, who was honestly a pretty nice fit for you. I don't know, man. I really just don't get it.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny that basically what we said was going to happen because like they're so convinced they can compete and they it's
just Marc Bergevin. It really is Marc Bergevin. I think Claude Julien is not a great coach for that team to begin with. I mean, like and it's also, to be fair, like the team's handing him a roster that's not built for Claude Julien hockey, big, heavy defensive hockey that got the Boston Bruins their Stanley Cup. Montreal's always been a smaller, faster team, likes to score. I mean, like their nickname is the Flying Frenchman for a reason, you know? You know, it's the Big Bad Bruins and the Flying Frenchman. Like, you can't take that mentality and throw it on the Flying Frenchman. It just doesn't work. So, to that point, I really just think it's Marc Bergevin, and I really think ownership should have stepped in and be like, Mark, listen, like, this is what we want to do with the team. This is the direction we want the team to go in. And Mark kind of was probably just like, and we're going this way. And they were like, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know what the Canadiens are doing. But we'll kind of wrap everything up on the Toronto Maple Leafs, who's a team that I'm kind of at a weird crossroads with because I expected them to be very active in this free agency. I expected them to completely retool the bottom six. But it just seems like they're making moves to undo certain other moves. Like, you let Tyson Barrie walk because, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think Tyson Barrie wanted anything to do with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Even if they did offer him a contract, he probably was telling them to hit the road.
I mean, the media treatment of Tyson Barrie was awful.
It was just disgusting. And look, I think they were expecting to get a Victor Hedman type. No, not Victor Hedman. I think they were expecting a guy more of a two-way defenseman, and what they got was a power play specialist. And they were like, "Why are you not good in his own end?" It's like because you're playing him against the best offensive forwards, and that's not who he should be playing against.
And that's been Tyson Barrie's playbook his whole career. He's always been like a number 3, number 4 power play specialist, always.
So I don't know. He's gonna be a shutdown guy.
So it's like I don't know what they were expecting. And then they got Cody Ceci, who I think they also let go. His contract is up. The only defenseman they have on a contract right now is. Outside of Zach Bogosian is Morgan Riley.
Well, they have a bunch of guys in their younger deals. That being said, their cap situation is kind of a mess, and I'm not in love with their defense because you get Jake Muzzin, you got Morgan Riley, TJ Brody, and Justin Hall, Zach Bogosian, and then you have Sandin, Liljegren, blah blah blah. Right? Travis Dermott's an RFA. I don't know. They've got kind of a logjam here, but like. Okay, who can play defense on this roster? Jake Muzzin.
TJ Brody. He's not terrible on his own end.
But like he's not the kind of guy that they need. You know what I'm saying? Like there were guys what they need and what they said they were gonna do is get harder to play against. Zach Bogosian's a great player for them. He's got bite, he's got snarl, he'll hit you, he'll scrap with you. He's a gamer, right?
But if you're trying to get harder to play against, why weren't they in on Joel Edmondson when he became available? He's another piece that could have worked for that.
You got Jake Muzzin, solid defensive defenseman. Love him on this team. And then you got offensive. TJ's like, I mean, he doesn't throw hits. Like, he threw 34 hits through like 60 games last year. I mean, that's
not exactly the most physical player in the world, but that's
so like offensive. We'll call it TJ Brody offensive. Justin Hall is two-way, but he's not really a big guy. Sandin, pure offense. Liljegren, pure offense. They had an opportunity here and they blew it. I mean, of all the guys they could have signed, and this is nothing against TJ Brody, but of all the players they could have signed, they essentially took Cody Ceci's like a two-way defenseman, Tyson Barrie's a pure offensive defenseman. They kind of combined both of them, signed TJ Brody, and it's like, yeah, that's good enough. It's like,
no. So you just combined 2 of your players from last year into one, and it's like, and it's didn't
and
work.
And you're paying him $5 million. I can give you 2 defensive defensemen for the cost of TJ Brody.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of guys, Mark Borowiecki, Radko Gudas. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of either one of them. I think they're kind of scumbags. But maybe a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs needs a guy like that.
And they sure saw enough of Mark Borowiecki and with his career in Ottawa, so they know what he brings to the table. He's hard to play against. He's annoying. He'll fight you. I mean, he made his career out of just being a scrapper. Like, that's exactly what they need.
Maybe you need a guy that sometimes, every once in a while, is just going to put somebody through the glass. Maybe you need a guy like that. Because the book on the Toronto Maple Leafs is they can't defend, and they're not going to hit you. So you can send your guys into the corner and skate circles around them because they're not going to hit you. You throw Mark Borowiecki and Radko Gudas in your bottom 6.
Good luck.
you're not gonna, good luck skating through the neutral zone against those guys.
I mean, you're probably going to catch an elbow, but, like, good luck. I mean, I don't like Radko Gudas. I never have. I also don't
I don't like either
Marcus.
one of them as far as, like, who they are.
But in terms of, like a type of player and fit, it would have been perfect. I mean, even Luke Schenn. Bring back Luke Schenn. He would have been exactly what you needed. Luke Schenn would be for what they would have paid him now. I mean, granted, his original tenure in Toronto did not end very well. But that being said, like, Luke Schenn's big. He throws hits. He'd be on your bottom pair. Like, I just don't understand why they didn't go out and get guys like that. But then they let Kyle Clifford walk and sign Wayne Simmons when they could have had both of them.
Like, I don't understand that to save my life.
Like, that
why would you not put both of them on your third line and just, like, look, you're not going to change the top six of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we've seen them try in the past. Like, when they signed David Clarkson to be the new Wendell Clark, it didn't work, okay? So if you want to keep your top six super high-flying offensive high-end talent, perfectly okay with that. But then you go out and sign Jason Spezza to a one-year deal. You sign Jimmy Vesey to a one-year deal. You let Kyle Clifford walk and sign Wayne Simmons.
And you let Frederick Gauthier walk because you don't. They didn't offer sheet him.
So who on this forward core is going to hit you? Wayne Simmons, okay. But you proved to yourself last year that you needed more than one guy that's hard to play. Like, if I could sit down Kyle Dubas, I would look him in the eye and be like, okay, you want to get harder to play against. Yeah. You proved to yourself last year that you need more than one token guy who's going to hit you. Okay. Are you going to sign Kyle Clifford? No. So what are you going to do? I'm going to sign Wayne Simmons. That's one guy. Yeah, that's fine. No, it's not. I don't understand. Did you not watch any... You as the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, did you not watch any Toronto Maple Leafs games last year? Like, were you sitting up in a booth with NHL Network on watching the Bruins like, yeah, this is a great Toronto Maple Leafs game? It's like, no.
The other thing is, like, all the money they spent in TJ Brody could have been spent on guys. Like, they could have signed two guys for that $5 million that they gave TJ Brody. They could have kept Kyle Clifford, and they could have signed another defenseman in the vein of, they could have signed both Mark Borowiecki and what was his name? Radko Gudas. Like, we could have got both of them
because they made a collective $4.5 million.
And maybe you have to go over the cap a little bit, but you sign Wayne Simmons and Kyle Clifford. Now that team is a whole new meaning to that team. That top six is dangerous on the ice, incredibly lethal up front, and then their bottom six is also dangerous because it's physically going to be hard to play against them. They're going to hit you and they're going to get the puck. I mean, you have Zach Hyman, physical player. I like Zach Hyman a lot, but like Zach Hyman also isn't, a scrapper. He's not going to fight. He's going to go out there and throw his hits. He's going to, make his bones in the corners. But like, you add Kyle Clifford and Wayne Simmons to that, that's scary.
Take that 1.6 you spent on Spezza and Jimmy Vesey and sign Matt Martin. You could have got Matt Martin, Wayne Simmons, and Kyle Clifford probably for a combined total of no more than $5 million, which is exactly around what you want to spend on your third line, right? Like a 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, around $4.5 million, right? Perfectly fine. Instead, you sign Jason Spezza again. You sign Jimmy Vesey.
Listen, I don't hate the Jason Spezza signing, right? Jason Spezza proved he was still pretty effective for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's a good number 3 center. Fine. You want to keep Jason Spezza? Fine. Play him on your third line. Then you play him with Wayne Simmons and maybe like Zach Hyman, because then you throw Alexander Kerfoot into the top 6, right? Okay, that's a pretty physical third line. But then your fourth line could have been Kyle Clifford, Matt Martin, and take your pick of whatever fourth line center you want to try and sign.
Pat Maroon was out there.
He's
not a center, but
I don't blame him for wanting to stay with the Lightning, though. He fits that mold for them.
But he was a free agent.
Yeah, I mean he ended up almost re-signing almost instantly, but
did they not look at what the Stanley Cup winner looked like? Julien Brisebois went out and spent, I think, 3 total picks, I think 2 seconds and a third, on Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow.
One of them was a first, I think. I think one of them ended up being a first in the one trade from New Jersey, right? Blake Coleman.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But still, 1 first, 1 second, and 1 third, and you built an entire bottom 6 that won you a Stanley Cup.
Like, Julien Brisebois looked at their team last year and said, we need to get harder to play against. And he did. He went out and got Pat Maroon at the beginning of the season. When the trade deadline rolled around and some more players became available, he jumped on the opportunity, picked up some more guys that were hard to play against, and guess what? He won a Stanley Cup.
The real thing is, like, the Tampa Bay Lightning are essentially what the Toronto Maple Leafs should be. They they're built in a very similar way with their top six. Like, their top six is incredibly lethal, and then their bottom six is a grinding, checking kind of team. That's exactly how the Maple Leafs should have built their team. But instead, they built 3 lines of scoring, which, again, the Lightning tried. They had 3 scoring lines and 1 fourth line, and they got gassed in 4 games. So what they do? They went out there, and they made their bottom 6 incredibly hard to play against. They made their bottom 6 defensive pairing harder to play against. And what happens? They ran right to a Stanley Cup. The hardest series they played was either the Islanders or probably the Columbus Blue Jackets, to be honest, because they played 9 overtime periods with them. So it's like, okay, and what did the Maple Leafs do? We signed Wayne Simmons. It's like, that's it? That's it. It's like, all right.
I really think that somebody needs to check his TV, because he might accidentally have been tuned in and watching Tampa Bay Lightning games last year, and like maybe he thinks he already addressed the bottom 6. Like maybe his eyesight's not that good, and like he just saw a blue jersey and was like, oh yeah, we got like Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. It's like
you didn't even make those phone calls, Kyle. How did you think that happened?
I mean, how can you watch teams like the New York Islanders over the last 2 seasons, right? Nowhere near as talented as you are. How can you watch teams like that with, the best fourth line in hockey go ahead and sweep the Pittsburgh Penguins, knock out the Capitals in 5, knock out the Flyers in 7, take the Tampa Bay Lightning to Game 6 overtime, which realistically, without that essentially scheduled Game 1 loss, that would have only been Game 5. How can you watch a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup? Watch a team like the Dallas Stars compete for a Stanley Cup? Watch a team like the Bruins last year compete for a Stanley Cup? How can you watch this over and over and over again because you're sitting on the couch because you've been knocked out of the first round of the playoffs 2 years in a row, and in this year you didn't even make the bracket? How can this happen over and over and over, and you're still making moves like this? How is that? How?
At what point do you think ownership steps in and gets rid of Kyle Dubas? Like, when is the Dubas experiment going to end? Because he wants to build this possession driven team. And listen, puck possession is hands down the most important aspect of hockey. Ken Holland will tell you the reason those Detroit teams won those Stanley Cups is because they controlled the puck so well. Yeah, they did, but you know what else they did? When they didn't have the puck, they were incredibly hard to play against because guys like Darren McCarty were going to put you through the glass to get it.
Darren McCarty, Chris Draper.
I mean, you had the Bash brothers. At one point you had Joey Kocur and Darren McCarty on the team.
Towards the end, they had Nick Cronwall, and then you also had a little guy whose name was Nick Lidstrom.
Yeah, and of course, Nick Lidstrom's your star player, and he scores 70 to 80 points. But guess what else he could do? He was the hardest defenseman to play against in the entire league. He's the best defenseman of all time. Because
he made you look like he wasn't overly physical, but he would turn the puck over and make you look like an idiot.
My dad, to put it this way, because my dad used to obviously watch those games because he's older than us, right? So he always said Nick Lidstrom. He goes, guys would think they were so much faster than him because they were. Guys would think they were so much faster than Nick Lidstrom, but he would just widen the gap and be like, all right, come right at me. They'd skate right at him, and he would just force them into the corner, and then just be like, all right, see you later. Like, what are you going to do now? You got me. Oh, no, you're in the corner. Where are you going to go?
You have the puck in the corner now. I think the biggest issue with a team that's solely puck possession driven is, the whole thing we heard last year, our team toughness is going to be our power play. We're going to force teams to take penalties, and we're going to score in the power play. First of all, it didn't work. Their power play was mediocre at best. I think it was like 15th in the league. Second of all, you can't ignore essentially 50% of the game. If you're the best puck possession team in the NHL, right? Absolute elite top of the top. You might possess the puck like 56% of the time. Against even the worst, even against a team like Detroit, you're definitely not possessing the puck more than like 58% of the time.
It's physically impossible to hold the puck 100% of the time.
Right, so that you can't essentially ignore on most nights what is 50% of the game and act like you're going to be okay. And to kind of draw a comparison to those Detroit teams, towards the end towards the beginning part where you had a guy like Chris Osgood, I mean, Freddie Anderson's probably as good as Chris Osgood was, right? Good enough on the right team. Freddie Anderson's actually probably better than Chris Osgood was at points, right? Goaltending, perfectly fine. Got that locked down. Although
they wanted to trade him.
We heard rumors that they were going to trade Freddie Anderson as if he was a problem for Matt Murray. Stupid as hell. Anyway, so your goaltending's fine, right? You have Morgan Riley, your pure offensive defenseman. Fantastic. You have Jake Muzzin. That's great. Where's the rest of the defense on this team coming from? Because those Detroit teams had Nick Lidstrom, Brian Rafalski,
the Russians, Slava Fetisov, It's Fetisov. They had even Sergei Fedorov won a Selke trophy at one point. I'm pretty sure.
I think he won a couple. He also played defense when their defense got hurt.
Like, it's like, just. And again, they were built on the Ken Holland model of puck possession, right? But Ken Holland realized, like you said, that you're not going to have the puck 100% of the time. So you also have to be able to defend when you don't have the puck.
I'm actually curious. I'm going to look up.
Like those Detroit, that roster.
What was the best puck possession team last year? What was the number?
I'm actually curious myself. I guarantee you it's probably something stupid. Like, it might be close to 60, but like, even then, that's really like, it's probably like an outlier. I imagine the average is like 55.
Let's see if I can find it by team.
The Rangers were one of the worst puck possession teams. They turned the puck over all the time.
It's just like you can't ignore essentially half the game.
The other thing is, if you want, okay, fine, you want to be a puck possession team, fine, but that makes sense. That's fine. But like, then you build a team that's a rush offensive team, like an offensive team built to play on the rush, right? You have Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, John Tavares. These guys are all built to play, a rush kind of game. Get on the ice, get up the ice quick, and score a goal. So, okay, that's fine, but you want to play puck possession hockey. These guys aren't conducive to holding onto the puck. These guys want to move the puck as quickly as possible and put it in the net. So if you're doing that, then you're not really holding onto the puck as much as you should be. So I don't get it,
Yeah, I mean,
like Colorado, right? Look at Colorado. They know that their top six is built to play on the rush, right? Their top line scores a lot of goals on the rush. So what did they do? They got Nazem Kadri, a guy who isn't necessarily a rush player, but can control the puck. Second line. He goes out there on that second line, and they control the play a little more.
it's hard to find like actual like puck possession as a percentage, but I mean, essentially, like, even in the most lopsided games, you're really not gonna beat more than like 60%.
Well, yeah. I mean, even the worst teams in the league are competent hockey teams. They're going to get the puck from you.
Let's see. Maybe if I do like offensive zone time. Stats break. I should have looked this up beforehand.
I mean, it's fine. It's part of like the conversation kind of naturally just got here. So.
There's all player stats. We'll have this for next time. But anyway, yeah, the whole Kyle Dubas, like, just.
I mean, it got John Scheiko lost his job over it.
It's got to be like, well, he's also a fucking.
He's a dick,
but I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to be a Toronto Maple Leafs fan right now.
I mean, you get Austin Matthews, arguably one of the best players in the league. You have Mitch Marner, the best player on the team, and you guys can't get out of the first round. Like,
I mean, just look at 11, 11, or 11.6, 11, 10.8, 6.9, and then the next closest guy is 3.5. Your highest paid defenseman is 5.6.
Wow. Jake Muzzin's making more than Morgan Riley. Well, in 2 years, Morgan Riley's probably going to make like 8.5, so yeah. It doesn't even matter. But how can you blame Frederik Andersen? How can any of this be Freddie Andersen's fault?
We're gonna trade for Matt Murray, so you're trading for a worse goalie.
Freddie Andersen had all of their wins through January. They didn't get a single win from their backup goaltender until they traded for Jack Campbell, who I think is also a really solid pick. I like Jack Campbell a lot for them, but that's neither here nor there. But like when he comes through and you're sitting with 25 wins, and 25 of those wins have all come from Frederik Andersen, like, how can you say he's the problem?
So you're gonna tell me that a 1.84 and a 9.36 in the playoffs wasn't good enough?
A 2.85 and a 9.09 on a team that can't defend.
Yeah, like you're gonna sit here and tell me that's the problem? The goalie isn't the problem. The problem is last year specifically, you had one guy who knew how to play defense. This year, going into the year, you probably have like 1.5.
I want to put it to you this way. Look at his numbers with Anaheim, a team that was competent defensively. 2.29, 9.23, 1, and then in 4 games for Norfolk, he had a 1.96. I mean, he's great. He was great for the Anaheim Ducks. He was he's letting in less than 2.5 goals a game, and his save percentage floated roughly at like 9.10, 9.20 on a team that could defend. Isn't that exactly what you want? Henrik Lundqvist had numbers like that and won a Vezina trophy with it. I mean, I think his goals against was like 1.9, but like still. He goes to Toronto, who, granted, that first year, the Toronto Maple Leafs were kind of a fluke. Like, they got into the playoffs. That was the Austin Matthews rookie year and all that. Right? Even then, 2.81 and a 9.18. That's respectable. for a team that's young and learning how to defend, and then the team never got any better around him, and the numbers stayed the same. So he's giving you the same consistent level of play, and you just haven't done anything to help him. So how is any of this his fault? And then you trade for Matt Murray, and then what happens? Matt Murray's numbers will be significantly worse. Matt Murray's numbers look like this on the Penguins when the Penguins were good. He'd be like giving up at least 3 goals a game for them, if not more.
Yeah,
so I don't understand it. Toronto's always... I'm gonna end it with this, I guess. Toronto's always looking for a scapegoat, and for some reason, Freddie Anderson is the scapegoat this time instead of John Tavares, who rightfully should be their scapegoat. John Tavares is inherently great hockey player, not taking anything from John Tavares. I would sign that contract if I was him too, right? Go home, be the captain of your favorite team. John Tavares is inherently the problem with this team because that $10.5 million they've locked into him is $10.5 million that they don't have to spend on defensemen or a bottom 6. They spend collectively $40 million on 4 players. Their top 4 players.
Well, your second line center should never be making $11 million.
No. There's no reason. I understand you want to be strong through the middle and you want, we have one of the best 1-2 punches in the league with Matthews and Tavares. It's like, great. That's fine. But your 1-2 punch is great, but your 3-4 punch sucks ass. And that's really what it comes down to. Where I think Buffalo, to tie this all back into the beginning, Buffalo realized we have a great number 1 center. And instead of going out and getting a guy that, would be another number 1 center to play behind Jack Eichel, they went out and got Eric Stahl. Perfect guy. Then they signed Cody Eakin, and they still have Zegmas Girgensons. They did it the right way. They realized that they have an elite talent. They have all of that up front, so let's go out and get guys who can play behind them. The Maple Leafs essentially were like, hey, we have this great top line. Let's go out and get guys that can play with them, not behind them. They didn't want a supporting cast. They wanted co-stars, whereas Buffalo has a bunch of supporting players.
I'll put it to you this way. The Sabres are spending $18 million on their 4 centers, roughly, added up. If we look at a team like the New York Islanders, if we project Barzal to get like maybe 8, they're probably going to be total combined spending around $20 million on their 4 centers, 2 of the best center cores in the league. Toronto Maple Leafs are spending $22 million on their top 2 centers. The Buffalo Sabres have 4 really good centers for the price of 2 Toronto Maple Leafs centers.
Right. And like I said, I think Toronto went for an idea instead of having a supporting cast to play behind them, they signed a bunch of co-stars. So all these guys individually are star players, and they were like, we'll make an ensemble cast. It's like a movie, right? We'll get Robert De Niro and, Al Pacino, and I'm essentially describing The Godfather to you. Robert Duvall, right? And on paper, it looks amazing, and it should work. And in the case of The Godfather, it did work, right? But in the case of the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's like they signed all these guys or drafted all these guys, and it's like you have an ensemble cast, but it sucks. You have no director, you have no vision, it doesn't work because there's nothing holding them together.
It's essentially like they're building a car, and they got turbocharged engine, all this crazy horsepower, nonsense, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The latest and greatest technology, touch screen, dashboard, blah 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 blah. And that would be the metaphor for the offense. Really nice, flashy things, and then they forgot the spark plug.
And they also got like a really nice, set of brakes, which is your goaltender.
And then they forgot the wheels.
Yep.
Which would be the defense. So like the brake pad's completely useless. Which in this situation is Freddie Anderson is doing all he can.
I mean,
but it's not good enough because he doesn't have wheels.
Yeah, because his defense is essentially bicycle tires you stuck on the car. So, like, the brakes are working really well, but you can't tell because the bike tires suck and your car is constantly breaking down. So it's like, wow, my car sucks. My brakes must be really bad. It's like, no, your wheels suck, bro. Like, come on.
So, you have any final thoughts on free agency or anything?
I mean, I think it was interesting. Like you said, I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that we didn't see any long-term contracts get handed out because I think a lot of teams are planning for the cap to begin to start rising 2 years from now. I think the one thing I think was interesting was Taylor Hall took a bet on me now contract and not a surefire pay me because he could fall flat on his face in Buffalo and come away and make.
If he scores another 16 goals, nobody's paying him $8 million.
No. But I respect that. I really respect the fact that he was like, I'm going to cash in on this maybe next year, but I'm going to bet on myself this year. And like, you got to give a guy credit. He thinks he can do it.
I think the Sabres vastly improved.
I think Calgary vastly improved.
I think the 2 teams that improved the most are probably the Sabres because not just Taylor Hall, but they went out and got Cody Eakin and they traded for Eric Stahl. So really solid offseason for them. Really showed up that middle. their center core. I wish they would have got a goaltender. There's still time. There's not real, unless they can somehow pry Allen out of Montreal. But all we've heard is that they're starting the year with Jake Allen on the roster. So
that's so stupid.
Montreal's walking into the season with $15 million in goaltenders on their.
We'll talk about that
roster.
another time. We should just do a whole episode, honestly, like in the coming weeks on the Montreal. Like, we should do
like the biggest enigmas in
the league. Yeah, and just try to see if we can figure out what they're thinking.
Like,
right?
What is Montreal doing? Why is Minnesota trading for Nick Bjugstad?
Why is San Jose trading for Devin Dubnyk?
Did anybody tell Jim Rutherford what Mike Matheson's contract structure was?
Like, I think that'd be a fun little podcast to do. Like, it'd be like a murder mystery. It'd be like a game of Clue. We try to piece together what they're thinking, and I guarantee you we'll still come out the other side being like, I have no idea what they're thinking.
Oh, we follow the trail. Well, then the first murder starts here, and it looks like it's the Ryan Suter and Zach Parise contract.
Jinkies, gang. Special guest Scoob and the gang. Maybe they'll solve the mystery for us.
I think Buffalo got better so far. I think Calgary got better so far. I like the direction of the Canucks. I wish they would have kept Tyler Toffoli. But like I said, this is still not – it's far from over. There are still several teams. Like specifically we said, the New York Islanders still are making moves because they still have to get Pollock and
the Rangers are still trying to figure out what they're doing.
The Rangers still need to find out, are they signing Ryan Strome?
Are they going to trade him? I think what's going to happen is I think they're probably going to take him to arbitration and see what that contract looks like and decide then. But it's like at that point it's too late.
They're still waiting for arbitration for Tony DeAngelo.
I think Tony DeAngelo's days are done in New York.
Adam Fox as well, right?
No, just Tony DeAngelo and Ryan Strome. And Georgiev. Georgiev, I think, filed for arbitration as well.
So I think they're kind of waiting because if they get some bread, that's going to really... The Rangers, in a really weird twist of fate, went from, like, throwing money all over the place with the Artemi Panarin season to, like, this season they're like, oh, our guys got good all of a sudden. And
well, the big issue is that the way the rookie contracts are structured is now that the bonuses are now counting towards the cap up to $2 million of contracts. The Rangers could be on the hook for $6.5 million in rookie contracts, which realistically isn't going to happen because not all of those guys are going to make the team, and if they do, they're not all going to meet their performance incentives. But
I just think a lot of guys came of age at the wrong time for the Rangers. They're like, oh, it's his contract year, and he put up 40 points. Like, oh boy. It's like, oh, Ryan Strome had a breakout year. Yeah, it's his contract year. It's like...
I think Ryan Strome might have honestly priced himself out of New York that way. He's going to be looking to get like 4.5 or 5, and it's like your career doesn't prove that you can do this over and over again. It's just like, oh, you rode shotgun with Artemi Panarin. Good job.
So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on them. Obviously, like I said, Hoffman, Dadonov, some names that are still significant that are still out there free agency. So whenever things kind of wrap up, when we kind of know more about where the teams sit, we'll do our free agency wrap up. So that might not be the next episode because depending on how long things take, maybe we'll do like a weird, funky episode in between, like you said, the murder mystery episode or something like that.
I mean,
it really depends on how long these processes take, and these arbitration hearings aren't until like the end of November or end of October / beginning of November. So,
I mean, it'll be like our typical, like usual off-season stuff, just pushed from July and August into September, into October and November. So, the episodes might be a little less frequent. I think we should still try and keep a once-a-week schedule because, like, there's still gonna be stuff to talk about.
Yeah, and if nothing else, we can just throw some like random things, like teams that are more or less set in their rosters. We can kind of do like projection episodes. Like a team like Montreal's probably not going to be that much more active, so we can maybe talk about them or talk about some other teams that like their rosters like starting to come together a little bit. So I don't really know what the next episode's going to be. It really depends on how things shake out. Depends on what happens in the NHL. We will try to keep it to an episode a week for sure. If you guys have any suggestions on things you want us to talk about, for sure, just let us know. You can reach out to us on Twitter at lightingthelamb1, or you can reach out to my personal Twitter at lbg_rob. I would say send it to the Lighting the Lamp podcast one, because my personal Twitter, I do check it, but the Lighting the Lamp podcast one, you're for sure going to get noticed on that. We'll totally give you guys credit if you come up with an idea, or even if there's just something you just want to hear us spill our brains about, totally let us know. So I'm not sure what the next episode is going to be. As far as when it'll be, it'll probably be like a week from now, depending on how things work out.
So early next week, probably mid to next week, we'll get another episode.
And as far as what that's going to be on, I don't know. That depends on what happens in the NHL. That's the exciting part about this part of the season is you never know what's going to happen because who knows? We could wake up tomorrow and Mike Hoffman could be like an Arizona Coyote for some reason. You never know.
You never know.
So
we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants right now.
Want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.